Chapter 198. The inextinguishable divine light in the blink of an eye. 8 years, 3 months, and 21 days had passed. During this short period of time, Luo Fan's figure was silent as he sat cross-legged on the ocean of chaotic yuan qi at the top of Buzhou Mountain. He shook the earthly immortal's fruit of Wei and constantly extracted boundless chaotic yuan qi and sent it into the various units of Dharma power. He used it to polish the strange existence formed by the various volumes of the scripture of the Way, and constantly improved his grasp and comprehension of the scripture of the Way. In 8 years, the results were rather impressive. On this day, Luo Fan suddenly opened his eyes and looked towards the boundless starry sky in the east. According to the results of his calculations, today was the day that Guangpu would enter the moon. And it was also today that an extremely huge change would occur. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't give up on paying attention to Guangpu, and it was even more impossible for him to continue shaking the earthly immortal's fruit of Wei and absorbing chaotic yuan qi with his eyes closed. The boundless starry sky was rather mysterious, and it even seemed to contain some kind of chaotic attribute. This caused the distance between the boundless starry sky to vary and the distance between the stars to vary. As Luo Fan's golden eyes of the great sun and silver eyes of the bright moon revolved, the moon in the depths of the boundless starry sky was reflected into his mind through his eyes. At the same time, he completely saw Guangpu, who was revealing a pleasantly surprised expression as she descended towards the moon. After overcoming 6 levels of heavenly tribulation and even cultivating the moonlight technique to the 6th level, no matter if it was Guangpu's appearance, aura, strength, or soul, all of them had undergone a rather huge and profound change. At this moment, Guangpu was cold and elegant, and her entire body revealed an awe-inspiring and inviolable noble temperament. Her face and body that seemed to be carved out of fine jade were like peerless works of art, filled with an indescribable charm that was sufficient to attract the yearning of any living being. And the power within her body could already see the outline of a 3-dimensional talisman that was shaped like a bright moon, and it was already close to magic power. Even she was completely able to see the form of her power after it was transformed into magic power. With such a change in her body, the soul within her sea of consciousness had naturally undergone a great change as well. At this moment, it had already strengthened by more than 10 times, and where it was tough and condensed, it contained unimaginable power. The white poplar spirit root that had fused into her body had a stable foundation, and it was unfathomable to the point that it was rooted in the unfathomable depths of the unfathomable depths. It extracted endless, strange energy to nourish her body, replenish her consumption, and allow her to be constantly. The bright of the moon contained the boundless and the coldest een of moon essence. Even the een of moon essence of the essence of the moon, of extreme yang essence of. This kind of extreme een and extreme cold was also rather pressuring to Luo Fan, who had just entered the moon of moon. He even had to use his magic treasures to protect himself in order to remain unharmed. At this moment, Guangpu's strength was far inferior to Luo Fan's from before. It could even be said that there was a world of difference between them. One could imagine how great the pressure that the essence of the essence of the essence of the essence of the moon of extreme yang essence was. Thus, in the process of descending towards the bright moon, as the power within Guangpu's body surged, a layer of silver-white light seeped out of her body, forming an extremely profound and astonishing defensive formation that was as large as her body. It wrapped around her body, completely isolating the endless een essence of the essence of the essence of the essence of the moon from the outside world from corroding her body. This formation was an exquisite formation that Guangpu had comprehended in these thousands of years. However, it was not any kind of spell or formation that Luo Fan had imparted to her. It was mixed with the mysteries of the natural formation where the poplar spirit root valley was located. It was rather abstruse. With one look, Luo Fan could see the origin of this formation that had left her body. In his heart, he was secretly amazed. After obtaining so many opportunities, it was really difficult for Guangpu to gradually break away from the shackles of the cultivation method that he had imparted to her. Stepping on the land that was formed by the endless essence of the moon, Guangpu suddenly felt a very strange feeling surging into her heart. It was as if there was some kind of strange existence that had coincidentally awakened at this moment without any warning. It was sending some kind of mysterious message to the endless starry sky, summoning an even more mysterious existence. As this feeling surged into her heart, she instantly knew that this was some kind of extremely strange and simple spiritual vigor that was sending out an invitation to the entire heaven and earth, yearning to combine with some kind of existence. Master's secret technique is indeed mysterious and unimaginable. As soon as Guangpu felt this strange feeling that suddenly arose in her heart, she could not help but show a look of reverence and surprise on her face. The time when Luo Fan told her that there was an opportunity on this bright moon was thousands of years ago. And after thousands of years, just when she stepped on the moon, the opportunity appeared. Obviously, even after thousands of years, her own master had predicted this matter accurately. This made Guangpu, who already knew that the world was unpredictable and had also comprehended the method of calculation. How could she not be reverent? How could she not be surprised? With light steps, Guangpu very easily walked on this moon, following the intention of the summoning. Although she was unable to attain the earth immortal fruit of Wei, she had already passed through 6 heavenly tribulations. She only needed 3 more heavenly tribulations to finally attain the fruit of Wei. Her cultivation realm was naturally not low. Moreover, she had already cultivated the so close, yet worlds apart method that Luo Fan had imparted to the point of perfection. As a result, it only took her a short while to arrive at the location where the summoning intent was coming from. It was a cave that had suddenly appeared before, and it led to an unknown location in the depths of the moon. At this moment, there was a bottomless cave that was 3 meters in diameter and emitting a silver light. In front of it was like a giant mouth, causing people to involuntarily be on guard. The moment Guangpu arrived at the side of the cave, a ray of gray light shot out from the depths of the cave. In an instant, it traversed tens of thousands of miles and collided with Guangpu's face. In the blink of an eye, it had already passed through the mud pill between Guangpu's brows and directly crashed into Guangpu's sea of consciousness. When Luo Fan saw this from the top of Buzhou Mountain, his expression became extremely complicated. With his eyesight, he could easily see the changes that Guangpu could not see. Previously, when Guangpu was 10,000 miles away from the moon, inside the gigantic 3-dimensional seal in the center of the moon, the originally endless chaotic energy tumbled, and a strange thing suddenly appeared in the midst of the endless chaotic energy. With the appearance of that strange thing, a wave of joy and a summoning intent spread out in all directions along the gigantic 3-dimensional seal, summoning the approaching Guangpu. It was as if a wanderer in a foreign land had finally found a home to return to. However, because the inspiration was rather simple, the summoning did not seem to have a specific target. Therefore, it made Guangpu feel that the summoning was directed to the entire endless starry sky. Following that, the gigantic and complicated 3-dimensional seal produced a change that Luo Fan had not deduced. A 10 feet wide hole directly rushed out from the center of the 3-dimensional seal. As it meandered, it drew a mysterious trajectory and finally connected to the surface of the moon, appearing near Guangpu. And at the moment when Guangpu came to the side of the hole, the strange thing inside the seal rushed out and rushed towards Guangpu impatiently. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into Guangpu's sea of consciousness. Although the strange thing was fast, how amazing was Luo Fan's eyesight. In the blink of an eye, he had already seen through the mystical creature and completely understood its nature. It was actually a connate, inextinguishable spirit light. It was the innate, indestructible spirit light that could grant one eternal life, never perish and never die. It was something that Luo Fan had, but he had spent hundreds of thousands of years trying to refine it, yet he was still unable to do so. No wonder I could deduce the sacred wood osmanthus flower incantation from the three-dimensional seal. It turns out that there was such a secret hidden in the three-dimensional seal. What a pity, what a pity. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. At that time, he used the gigantic three-dimensional seal in the moon to deduce the Pangu chaotic heavenly pupil. Right chapter, he also deduced the sacred wood osmanthus flower incantation, which was beyond his expectation. When this magic art appeared, he only thought that it was needed to balance the sun, and he didn't think much about it. The sun contained the essence of the sun and the true fire of the sun, two kinds of extremely positive and strong energies, and the three-dimensional talismans contained in it could be used to deduce a magic art. The moon only contained the essence of the lunar essence, a type of extremely cold yin energy. The three-dimensional talisman contained within it could deduce two cultivation techniques. This, however, formed another form of balance. It seemed to contain the infinite mysteries of the transformation of yin and yang. However, he didn't expect that the moon actually contained such a mysterious mystery. If he had known earlier, he definitely wouldn't have left the moon so easily. He would have studied every inch of the moon from inside out before he was willing to let it go. However, it was too late to say anything now. The moment the connate inextinguishable spirit light entered Guang Pu's sea of consciousness, it instantly wrapped Guang Pu's soul, which was shaped like a giant tree. Instantly, a bit of Guang Pu's imprint was absorbed into Guang Pu's body. In a flash, Guang Pu did what Luo Fan wanted to do with the help of countless reincarnations and tens of thousands of Yuanhui. She subdued the connate inextinguishable spirit light. The gap between them was so huge that it couldn't even be described by the clouds and mud. The place of opportunity is really mysterious and wonderful. After sighing for a long time, Luo Fan could only sigh helplessly. With this sigh, his mood gradually calmed down. He had already left all the distracting thoughts caused by seeing the connate inextinguishable spirit light behind him. In fact, at that time, the connate inextinguishable spirit light had only been subdued by Guang Pu. If Luo Fan wanted to, he could still take it away. However, Luo Fan did not have any idea to take away the connate inextinguishable spirit light. He did not regret letting Guang Pu go to the moon to seize this opportunity that he was quite envious of. When he did not have the connate inextinguishable spirit light, he did not accept it when Hong Jun gave it to him. Moreover, he had the connate inextinguishable spirit light now. Chapter 199. The Seventh Tribulation. Lunar Divine Destruction Tribulation. Guang Pu did not know what the thing that had suddenly rushed out of the ground was. But the moment the connate inextinguishable spirit light rushed towards her, she felt a wave of shock in her heart and a chill ran through her body. One had to know that at this moment, there was a human-shaped protective formation around her body. The defensive power of this formation could not be said to be very strong, but it was able to isolate the endless lunar essence in the surroundings, so its defensive power was not weak. However, such a strong defensive power did not obstruct the thing that was rushing towards her at all, allowing it to rush into her sea of consciousness with great ease. This kind of stimulation, for Guang Pu, who was obsessed with controlling herself and raising her cultivation level, was really too much. Fortunately, the moment this connate inextinguishable spirit light rushed into her sea of consciousness, it absorbed a bit of Guang Pu's imprint into her body. In an instant, it produced countless information that flowed into Guang Pu's soul, allowing Guang Pu to instantly understand the nature of this wondrous thing. Connate inextinguishable spirit light, born of nature, undamaged after birth. Refining it can lead to eternal immortality, and refining it can lead to connate spirit treasures. There's actually such a wondrous thing in this world. Such a thought flashed through Guang Pu's mind, and shock and joy appeared on her face. Obtaining this connate inextinguishable spirit light was tens of thousands of times better than a pie falling from the sky. Even with Guang Pu's indifference, she could not help but be shocked and overjoyed. Such a wondrous and precious thing, and Master actually bestowed it to me. Then she thought about how she had obtained this thing, and she could not help but show great gratitude on her face. The connate inextinguishable spirit light that was born of nature and undamaged after birth was so precious that she believed that even her master definitely did not have too many of them, and it was even possible that he did not have any at all. But even so, her master had actually bestowed this connate inextinguishable spirit light to her without hesitation. This kind of great kindness was already equivalent to giving her a new life. At this point, she was completely loyal to Luo Fan and no longer had any doubts. Even if Luo Fan wanted her life in the future, she would not hesitate to hand it over. After thanking Luo Fan in her heart, Guangpu sent her consciousness into the innate inextinguishable spirit light and carefully sensed the information revealed by the innate inextinguishable spirit light. She tried to comprehend the mysteries of the inextinguishable nature of the innate inextinguishable spirit light. With Guangpu's current strength, it was naturally impossible for her to sense the essence of the inextinguishable divine light. Even with Luo Fan's level of cultivation, it was impossible, let alone her. However, this ray of spiritual light had come to her on its own and been subdued by her on its own. As a result, a portion of its mysteries had automatically fused with her soul. She could sense it, and she could also slowly comprehend it. As her consciousness sank into the endless information, in an instant, Guangpu felt like she had entered a state where there was no one, and she was in a trance. In this state, it was as if there were countless pieces of information fusing into her mind, allowing her to suddenly understand countless profound truths. However, these truths were extremely obscure and difficult to fathom, even making her feel as if there was no Tao at all. The entire process was unbelievably profound. As her consciousness entered this state of comprehension, the energy in her body, which had already transformed into the outline of magic power, began to circulate rapidly. Waves of profound and unfathomable aura radiated from her body, gradually drawing in the endless moonlight that filled the surroundings. The great formation on the surface of her body, which was protecting her from the corrosion of the surrounding lunar essence, instantly collapsed with a bang. It was no longer able to produce the slightest defensive effect, causing the surrounding lunar essence to pounce over without any obstruction. It was like a waterfall that fell from the sky as it collided with her body. However, this time, the moonlight did not cause any damage to her body. It did not corrode her body at all. Instead, it suddenly became extremely gentle, as if it was the chaotic energy that she had been absorbing for the past 100 years. It constantly surged into her body, and then through some profound and unfathomable method, it was scattered by the embryonic energy in her body. In the end, it was melted into her body, gradually filling the profound energy circulating in her meridians. As the essence of the moon and moon entered his body, the three-dimensional talismans that were forming and collapsing in his body took a longer time to form, and the time it took for them to collapse also became shorter. In other words, the time that these three-dimensional talismans could be maintained was longer and longer. This, clearly, meant that Guangpu's cultivation was increasing at a visible rate, and her body instinctively began to circulate the moon frost secret art. In that instant, the mantra flowed through her mind, and the energy in her body also began to circulate rapidly according to the route of the mantra. As the moonlight poured in, a faint pressure gradually descended from an unfathomable place, enveloping Guangpu's body. Following this pressure, even more of the extreme moonlight in the surroundings began to condense towards the area 1,000 zhang above Guangpu's head. During this process, it was constantly compressed and condensed, finally forming a huge tribulation cloud that occupied an area of 10 mu. This tribulation cloud was silvery white, extremely dense, and was hundreds of feet thick. In the center of this tribulation cloud, The energy was compressed to the extreme, and it produced strands of silvery white lightning. Following the appearance of these strands of lightning, the originally faint pressure in the surroundings suddenly increased by more than 1,000 times. In the blink of an eye, the originally indiscernible pressure turned into something solid, enveloping the 10 acres of space around the Guangpu. Suppressing the void in this space, all kinds of spatial divine arts like so close, yet worlds apart, could no longer be used. The lightning produced in the center of the tribulation cloud was the great Eend divine destruction thunder, which was formed from the compression and friction of the moonlight. Needless to say, the might of the heavenly thunder was earth-shattering. More importantly, the heavenly thunder was 100 times more harmful to living beings who cultivated by absorbing the essence of the moon and moon. In other words, to Guangpu, the great Eend divine destruction thunder was 100 times more powerful than to Luo Fu. Perhaps Luo Fu could withstand this heavenly thunder, but Guangpu, whose cultivation was 100 times higher than Luo Fu's, might not be able to. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was at the top of Buzhou Mountain, naturally saw this change. It's a pleasant surprise to be able to trigger the 7th heavenly tribulation. This time's heavenly tribulation was clearly the extreme Eend God destroying thunder tribulation. Although the power of this heavenly thunder tribulation was strong, and the damage it could do to Guangpu was terrifying, Luo Fan was not worried about Guangpu's safety. That innate, inextinguishable spiritual light was not fake. Perhaps Guangpu would suffer a great blow and suffer a great deal of pain. She might even be on the verge of death. However, with the protection of the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, her life wouldn't be in any danger. To her, it was only a matter of time before she passed this heavenly tribulation. The moment the pressure turned material and suppressed the 10 acres of space around her, Guangpu woke up from that mysterious state. She raised her head to look at the tribulation clouds that were slowly spinning and flashing with silver-white lightning. There wasn't a trace of panic in her eyes, nor was there any eagerness to try. She was just very calm and very indifferent, looking at the tribulation clouds with almost no fluctuation of emotion. At the same time, she quickly circulated the energy in her body that was like a metamorphosis of magic power, mobilizing every strand of potential in her body, preparing to deal with the endless attacks from above. The fundamental cultivation method that Guangpu cultivated was the divine Eend technique, and in the crossing disaster realm, she cultivated the Guanghan bright moon technique. Both of these had a mysterious and inexplicable connection with the moon. Naturally, there was nothing wrong with using the lunar essence. As her power circulated, countless lunar essence gathered around her, gradually forming layers and layers of defensive formations around her body. The number of these defensive formations kept increasing as time passed. When the tribulation clouds formed by the power of the lunar essence above her head finished brewing, and a bolt of lightning fell from the sky, the number of defensive formations had already increased to more than 810. They densely covered the space within 100 feet of her body. The three-dimensional talismans that circulated endlessly on the formation were tiny and dense, circulating endlessly. There were probably billions of them, piled up on the 10 feet diameter hemispherical surface, almost forming a sealed eggshell, and almost blocking all the light. The bolt of lightning that struck down from the tribulation clouds was only the size of a thumb. It spiraled in the void, like a flying dragon rushing down from the sky, directly hitting the sealed eggshell. And when this bolt of lightning struck down, it was like the first breach in a dam, bringing about a huge explosion. As it struck down, the tribulation clouds were like rain, and in an instant, there were tens of thousands of lightning bolts following. These lightning bolts were all silver white, condensed to an unimaginable extent. Although they were only the size of a thumb, their power was extremely strong, even causing the space above the moon to slightly distort. Like this, the continuous bombardment almost continuously bombarded the 810 layers of the formation that was like an eggshell, instantly drowning the entire formation. This formation was formed by the lunar essence. And for the lunar god destroying heavenly thunder, it was an existence that could allow them to unleash their strongest attack power. But at the same time, because they were formed by the lunar essence, they were more targeted towards the heavenly thunder and could better block the heavenly thunder. In the blink of an eye, the world had turned silvery white. Countless loud explosions suddenly erupted, and the ground within a 1,000-mile radius of where Guangpu was shook violently. Countless huge cracks even spread from this position, gradually covering the space within a 1,000-mile radius like a spiderweb. Chapter 200. Heavenly Tribulation Passageway. Carefree heavenly Damona's endless lunar essence poured into the tribulation. The tribulation clouds and the formation began to strengthen at a rapid pace. However, this tribulation cloud was born from the laws of the world, and its compatibility with the lunar essence of the lunar essence was several times stronger than Guangpu's self-created formation. Although the two were strengthened at the same time, the tribulation cloud's strengthening power was several times faster than the formation. As a result, in just a few breaths' time, the great God-destroying heavenly thunder that erupted from the tribulation clouds suppressed the defensive power of the formation. In the blink of an eye, 400 layers of the formation were shattered by the great God-destroying heavenly thunder, turning into strands of energy fragments that scattered in all directions. The formation was connected to Guangpu. The moment the formation was destroyed, Guangpu's body trembled violently. She felt the energy in her body become chaotic almost instantly, as if it was about to scatter in all directions and could no longer be collected. Endless heavenly thunder erupted from the tribulation clouds, pouring down like a waterfall from the sky. The power was so great that it distorted the endless space in the starry sky, creating a dreamlike effect. The eggshell-like formation exploded layer by layer. Countless fragments broke free from the eggshell, but they were crushed again by the endless heavenly thunder, turning into nothingness in the end. It was a beautiful scene, but it was also filled with endless danger. Guangpu's mind moved slightly. The energy in her body quickly circulated, and several times more lunar essence, moon essence madly gathered towards her. She did her best to draw out even more formations, filling up the gaps and flaws that had been created when the formations had been shattered and destroyed. However, there was an undeniable difference between this increase and the power of the heavenly thunder. As time passed, the 810 layers of the formation rapidly decreased. After a good while, the 810 layers of the formation had completely exploded and dispersed into nothingness. Guangpu was now completely exposed. She faced the endless great God-destroying heavenly thunder that came crashing down from above without any defense. Guangpu knew that it was impossible to deal with the divine punishment by relying on the formation. She let out a long sigh. With a thought, a 3-feet-tall white poplar emerged 3 feet above her head. This white poplar was the spiritual root of chaos that Guangpu had spent hundreds of years to find, the one that Luo Fan had guided her to collect. At this moment, although the chaotic spiritual root above her head looked complete, it only had branches and leaves, but no roots. The roots of this spiritual root of chaos seemed to have taken root in the void, fusing with the entire void and becoming invisible. At the same time, it was constantly absorbing some kind of mysterious existence in the void, appearing incomparably stable and unbreakable. With the appearance of this white poplar, billions of fine lights suddenly flashed and seeped out from this spiritual root, completely enveloping and sealing off the space within a 3-feet radius around Guangpu. With the appearance of this fine light, it was unknown how many millions of heavenly thunders directly collided with this fine light. The countless heavenly thunders that were enough to break the ground into countless spiderweb-like cracks were instantly annihilated by the fine light, transforming into all kinds of unfathomable things. The branches and leaves of the white poplar twisted and swallowed all of them, finally disappearing without a trace. The heavenly thunders were like rain, but the white poplar was like the sea, absorbing all of them. Throughout the entire process, the white poplar did not show any other changes other than its branches and leaves constantly swaying. At the same time, the energy inside Guangpu's body was also constantly changing. The three-dimensional prototype talismans that were like bright moons became more and more obvious, their forms becoming more and more complete, and the time they lasted became longer and longer. Among them, there was a mysterious and unpredictable aura and an unfathomable aura emitted from these three-dimensional prototype talismans. It was as if some kind of transformation was taking place, and some kind of existence with infinite power was being nurtured. Endless mysterious energy continuously surged into her body through the connection between her and the white poplar spiritual root. Then, through some mysterious mechanism, it surged into these gradually forming three-dimensional talismans, becoming the driving force for the formation of these three-dimensional talismans. However, for these three-dimensional talismans to form, the time needed was extremely terrifying, and the energy needed was also unimaginable. Therefore, although the mysterious energy that surged into them was endless and incomparably large, the transformation speed of the three-dimensional talismans was still very slow. The time it took for each transformation was so short that it was almost negligible. Hundreds of feet above Guangpu's head, the extremely condensed silver tribulation cloud struck down more and more lunar god, destroying heavenly lightning. And at the same time, its size also increased. After 3 days and 3 nights, these lunar god, destroying heavenly lightning that constantly struck down, had already strengthened to the point that they were like huge flood dragons that descended from the sky. They twisted and twisted as they pounced towards Guangpu, and then they were twisted and dispersed by the millions of fine light emitted by the white poplar spiritual root. In the end, they surged into the white poplar spiritual root, and then, through some mysterious and unfathomable method, they surged into Guangpu's body and were absorbed by her. The entire process was so smooth that it didn't seem like a tribulation, but instead, it seemed like the natural laws of heaven and earth were providing the energy that Guangpu needed to cultivate, and it seemed extremely easy. As Luo Fan watched this scene from the top of Buzhou Mountain, he couldn't help but admire the power of the white poplar spiritual root in his heart. This white poplar spiritual root was the product of the failed evolution of innate gods, and it was somewhat similar to the mysterious object that could be upgraded into a magic treasure. However, it contained an even more powerful vitality and seemed even more mysterious. It could be said that although this spiritual root didn't have a treasure spirit, its power was already equivalent to a mysterious magic treasure. Luo Fan could imagine that it possessed great power. However, imagining its power was one thing, but imagining that this white poplar spiritual root could possess such great power that it could directly absorb the lunar god, destroying heavenly lightning as if it was primordial chi of chaos. This was completely beyond Luo Fan's expectations. It seems that Guangpu's future achievements will definitely not lose to Hongjun. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh in his heart. At the same time, an inexplicable sense of accomplishment surged in his heart. Hongjun's future achievements were extremely high. This was certain. After all, he was the teacher of the sages and the teacher of heaven and earth in the legends of later generations. However, in the legends of later generations, there was no such existence as Guangpu who was not inferior to Hongjun. It was very obvious that Guangpu's existence today was because of Luo Fan. It could be said that whatever achievements Guangpu had in the future, it was all thanks to Luo Fan. This sense of accomplishment of creating history made Luo Fan feel that it was quite wonderful. Just as Luo Fan was secretly sighing that Guangpu's future achievements would not be low, the lunar god destroying heavenly lightning tribulation that Guangpu was going through had some kind of dangerous change. The center of the tribulation cloud that was 10 acres in size seemed to have been compressed to the limit, and the lunar god destroying heavenly lightning produced in the center of the tribulation cloud had become even more dazzling. Suddenly, at a certain moment, there was suddenly a mysterious and unfathomable deep passageway that appeared in the center of the lunar god, destroying heavenly lightning. In this strange passageway, Luo Fan felt a kind of aura that he was very familiar with and also very wary of. The aura of the heavenly demons. The moment he felt this aura, there were countless heavenly demons that seemed illusory and seemed to not have a physical body, but contained some kind of strange energy that directly rushed out from his passageway. In an instant, they occupied the area of 1,000 miles around Guangpu. In the process, they constantly devoured the endless lunar essence around them, and gradually some kind of strange and inexplicable change appeared. This aura, it's the aura of the Mahesvara outside the untainted land. These heavenly demons are Mahesvara heavenly demons. Luo Fan was shocked, and two divine lights shot out from his eyes, locking onto the image of Guangpu's tribulation above the moon. These countless Mahesvara heavenly demons did not have any fixed form, as if they were just a group of light shadows that were constantly changing. However, after absorbing the endless lunar essence, they gradually changed endlessly. Among them, almost all the light shadows that could be found in the world could be seen. Moreover, Luo Fan could even see his own figure, the figure of Luo Fu, the figure of Luo Chunyang. These countless figures formed an extremely strange and ever-changing world that pointed directly at Guangpu's heart and instantly enveloped Guangpu within it. It even covered the tribulation clouds in the sky, covered the divine, indestruction, heavenly lightning that was charging down like countless dragons, and even covered the white poplar spirit root that was floating 3 feet above Guangpu's head and emitting a myriad of fine lights. At this moment, Guangpu felt as if she was in another mysterious, strange, and infinitely vast world. She also felt as if she had turned into a woman who did not have any power, or whose power surpassed everything. It was as if she was living the life she had dreamed of. An inexplicable satisfaction and an inexplicable sense of crisis filled her heart, forming a very contradictory yet addictive power, causing her thoughts to seem to become incomparably clear, yet also incomparably stagnant. Luo Fan looked at this scene, and he couldn't help but frown slightly. With his insight, he was naturally able to clearly see the actual situation and methods of the myriad of Freedom Heavenly Devils. The myriad of Freedom Heavenly Devils had obviously relied on the aura produced by Guangpu's heavenly tribulation to connect themselves with Guangpu's heart, and they relied on Guangpu's memories to construct the ideal world that Guangpu desired the most. They wanted to drag Guangpu into the abyss of depravity, and finally cause Guangpu's death and soul to disperse. The myriad of Freedom Heavenly Devils seemed to Guangpu to construct only one world, but in fact, they had constructed millions of worlds. The reason why it made Guangpu feel that it was only one world was because these worlds would change according to Guangpu's wishes. For example, at this moment, if Guangpu felt that living a peaceful life with Luo Fu and the others was the most ideal, then she would throw herself into the world where she lived a peaceful life with Luo Fu and the others. At the next moment, if Guangpu felt that becoming an immortal was the most ideal, then she would throw herself into the world where she became an immortal. At the next moment, if Guangpu felt that living eternally as a tree was the most ideal, then she would pull herself into a world where she lived eternally as a tree. Chapter 201. Chapter 201. Chapter 20112 Freedom Heavenly Demons in the Four Poles and 8 Wastelands amidst these countless worlds. Guangpu felt that he was living a carefree and carefree life. He felt that he was in the most ideal and perfect state at almost every moment. No matter how her thoughts changed, no matter how different her current thoughts were from the previous thoughts, she would always discover that she was in the most perfect state of her thoughts. The whole process was so mysterious and unfathomable that the extremely strange changes did not even raise her guard. It was as if such incredible changes were extremely natural, as if she was born this way. Some indescribable thoughts filled Guang Pu's mind. It was as if there were countless faintly discernible voices constantly telling her that this world was real, that this was the world she wanted, that she had always been in this world since she was born, and that she should stay in this world forever. As these voices spoke, Guang Pu's originally firm and pure Taoist heart involuntarily became muddled. She gradually forgot where she was and forgot that she was undergoing the extremely dangerous supreme, God-destroying thunder tribulation. She forgot what the world she was in just a moment ago was like. As Guang Pu sank into depravity, the billions of freedom heavenly demons became more intelligent and powerful. The worlds they constructed became more complete, more real, and the flaws in them became fewer and fewer. The countless worlds occupied a radius of thousands of miles around Guang Pu. All the worlds overlapped with each other, and as Guang Pu gradually sank into depravity, they gradually intertwined and fused together. As time passed, the number of these worlds decreased, and the number of freedom heavenly demons that constructed worlds also decreased. However, the remaining freedom heavenly demons became stronger and stronger. Luo Fan frowned as he looked at this scene from the top of Buzhou Mountain. At this moment, his eyes were flashing with golden and silver light. He absorbed the billions of freedom heavenly demons into his mind and carefully analyzed them, trying to find the freedom heavenly demon he was familiar with. Great freedom heavenly demon master, where are you? I don't believe that you won't take advantage of such a good opportunity to enter the untainted land. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At the same time, boundless information regarding the billions of Mahesvara heavenly demons flowed through his mind, and he categorized them and compared them. Unfortunately, the heavenly demon was an ever-changing existence, not to mention the most mysterious and bizarre, carefree heavenly devil. It was very troublesome to find a particular sky demon among the billions of Mahesvara demons. Even with Luo Fan's current cultivation level, even with his great sun golden pupils and bright moon silver pupils, it was still difficult to clearly analyze the nature of each Mahesvara demon lord, let alone find out whether there was a great freedom heavenly demon lord among them. As for Guang Pu's safety, even at this moment, Luo Fan was not worried at all, because this was not the most dangerous moment for Guang Pu. The billions of heavenly demons seemed strange, but they didn't even activate the innate, inextinguishable spirit light, so there was no need to worry about her safety. When there was real danger, the innate, inextinguishable spirit light would automatically activate and protect Guang Pu's soul. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days and 3 nights passed. The billions of worlds constructed by the Mahesvara heavenly demons had already merged into one world during these 3 days. It was a world that was truly incomparable and ever-changing, but it had completely merged with Guang Pu's mind and will. The billions of Mahesvara heavenly demons had already merged into 12 Mahesvara heavenly demons that occupied the 4 corners of this world and controlled the changes of this world. Every Mahesvara heavenly demon was close to omnipotent in this world. In terms of their own strength, even if they weren't in this world, they were at least a level higher than Guang Pu. Hundreds of feet above Guang Pu's head, the tribulation cloud that was covered by this world had already condensed to an unimaginable degree. The entire tribulation cloud was completely filled with the great En God, destroying heavenly lightning, and not a trace of the great En moon could be seen. The countless great En God, destroying heavenly lightning that descended from the sky like flood dragons, had already condensed into one, turning into an incomparably huge heavenly pillar that rushed out from the center of the tribulation cloud. The power of the entire tribulation cloud blasted down, straight into the billions of specks of light emitted by the poplar spirit root above Guang Pu's head. At this moment, the billions of specks of light emitted by the poplar spirit root had already become extremely dim, and it was on the verge of collapse, as if it could collapse at any time. Even the originally incomparably stable branches began to shake violently, and countless leaves continuously fell from the branches of the spirit root at every moment. There were countless tiny specks of light and lightning that dispersed in all directions from the point where the great God, destroying heavenly lightning that was like a heavenly pillar, came into contact with the specks of light. If it wasn't for the world constructed by the 12 Mahavira heavenly demons, it would definitely appear extremely mysterious and beautiful. This meant that the poplar spirit root was no longer able to convert all the lightning, and that the spirit root was about to be unable to protect Guangpu's body. On this day, the 12 Mahavira heavenly demons exerted their strength at the same time, and the heavenly pillar suddenly doubled in size, as did the degree of condensation. In an instant, it shattered the billions of specks of light emitted by the poplar spirit root and directly bombarded the poplar spirit root. When the poplar spirit root received this attack, its entire body trembled violently. The tree root that was originally deeply rooted in the void and constantly drawing out some indescribable existence actually appeared for the first time. As it appeared, the poplar spirit root seemed to be bombarded by an unimaginably terrifying force, and it directly rushed into Guangpu's body. In an instant, it merged into her body and disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared in the first place. And the great God destroying heavenly lightning also instantly pounced on Guangpu's body as it retreated. The clothes on her body were completely shredded the moment the lightning pounced on her, revealing her beautiful body that could charm any living creature. The lightning violently entered Guangpu's body, instantly penetrating her body's defenses and shattering everything it could. It caused her beautiful jade-like body to gradually change color. Waves of burnt yellow gradually appeared. Her hair stood up, and her expression, which was originally immersed in some unimaginable realm, revealed an expression of pain. How long have I been in this world? 10,000 years? 100,000 years? Or 1,000,000 years? In the world constructed by the 12 great freedom heavenly demons, Guangpu suddenly had a strange feeling in her heart at this moment. It was as if there was something that she urgently needed to do, but she couldn't think of it no matter how much she thought about it. How did I appear in this world? Suddenly, this thought came to Guangpu again. As this thought appeared, a strange light suddenly flashed in her heart, as if it was telling her something. Listening carefully, there were endless questions drowning her mind in an instant. Guangpu's mind and consciousness moved very quickly. Although she couldn't reach Luo Fan's level, it was still not a problem for millions of thoughts to flash through in an instant. As these questions emerged, she instantly sorted out and summarized all of them. She also instantly realized that she had appeared in this world, referring to this world that was in such a form and suited her most ideal state of mind at this moment, but not the world constructed by the heavenly demons, for a short 10 seconds. She also discovered the endless flaws of the world she was in. This world is fake. When Guangpu discovered these endless flaws, a mysterious light flashed in her eyes. She shouted softly, and her body shook, turning into a silver rainbow that shot straight into the depths of the sky. That was the biggest flaw that she had sensed, a flaw that could allow her to leave this world. A sigh that seemed to contain the endless mysteries of heaven and earth entered her ears. At the same time, huge figures that soared into the sky and rebuked the earth appeared in all directions of this world. These figures weren't ugly. Instead, they were incomparably strange and majestic, containing some kind of extremely attractive temperament. At first glance, people would feel that they were supreme, filled with infinite benevolence, and had a strange feeling of infinite kindness towards themselves. Isn't this world good? This is a world constructed completely according to your ideal. All of your desires can be satisfied in this world. Immortal life, invincible power, groundbreaking Tao, a husband who gathers all the virtues, obedient children. Here, you don't have to make a choice at all. No matter how contradictory and conflicting your desires are, they can be satisfied. Isn't this better than having to make choices all the time outside? You have to struggle with fear, and you have to worry about dying all the time. A great freedom heavenly demon, who was as beautiful as the collection of all the beautiful things in the world, stood in front of Guangpu. She stretched out her beautiful jade-like hand and flicked it at Guangpu, then said softly. A boundless power appeared out of thin air. It suddenly flashed in front of Guangpu and directly crashed into Guangpu's body. This great freedom heavenly demon was the creator of this world and was nearly omnipotent in this world. This power made Guangpu feel as if she couldn't resist it. In an instant, she felt as if all the bones in her body were shattering, and her body was about to fall apart. Her body was also swept back in that instant, and she was thrown into the world that had become incomparably deep and abyss-like. Fake. It's fake. No matter how wonderful it is, no matter how intoxicating it is, it can't become real. All kinds of enlightenment flashed through Guangpu's mind, and she let out a soft cry. As she cried out, a gray spiritual light shot out from the Niwen Palace between her brows. In an instant, it circled around her body and protected her. Then, it suddenly charged forward, breaking through the layers of obstruction of the 12 great freedom heavenly demons, tearing apart the barrier of this world, and rushing straight out. Chapter 202. It was in the world that Guangpu had created after breaking through the 12 freedom heavenly demons. At the same time, in a yellow spring that was 1,080,000,000 miles deep underground, some kind of extremely strange and mysterious change was taking place. There, a handsome young man, who was 6 meters tall, had a pair of long spiral horns on his head and a pair of bat wings, was madly devouring the visible and invisible rune ghosts within 1,000,000 kilometers. This young man was the strange, innate, divine burden that had disappeared for thousands of years, Mo Luo. At this moment, Mo Luo's body was emitting some kind of strange attraction force. This attraction force affected the area of the yellow spring for millions of kilometers. Within this wide range, all the talisman ghosts, visible and invisible, were attracted to him. Like moths flying into a flame, they madly gathered towards him from all directions, and then rushed into his body with an incomparably fierce momentum. The bat-like wings behind Mo Luo flapped slightly. His face showed an extremely intoxicated and addicted look. There was a thick black fog constantly surging out of his body, gradually fluctuating in a sphere with a diameter of 1,000 meters around his body. Like a blender, amidst the endless invisible rune ghosts and the occasional visible rune ghosts into pieces. It turned them back into the incomparably condensed heavy yin qi. Then it was completely devoured into his body. Almost with every breath, there were thousands of invisible rune ghosts being swallowed into his body, and they were turned into pure heavy and turbid yin qi, which was then madly minced by the very strange energy in his body. It was turned into an energy with the aura of yin qi. It was completely filled with the strange energy that was constantly circulating in his body, and at the same time nourished his already extremely strong body. If Luo Fan was here, he would find that Mo Luo's cultivation had actually reached the peak of crossing E-stage. It was just like Hong Jun, who was only one heavenly tribulation away from attaining the earthly immortal's Tao fruit. Moreover, what was even more surprising was that in the ceaselessly circulating energy in Mo Luo's body, there were countless strange and inexplicable, ever-changing three-dimensional runes. It was the cultivation method that Mo Luo cultivated. It was actually quite similar to the Tao fruit Grand Tao that Luo Qi had created and only passed down to his disciples. This was simply a coincidence that was practically impossible. One had to know that the evolution of the primordial world was not complete, and the various rules were not complete. Thus, there was naturally no specific cultivation system that could point directly towards the Grand Tao. The living beings of the primordial world wanted to cultivate and escape. In order to obtain the power of several peaks, one could only comprehend cultivation methods on their own. However, this kind of self-comprehension could allow one to comprehend countless methods, such as the primordial spirit Great Tao, the talisman Great Tao, the diagram Great Tao, the golden core Great Tao, and so on and so forth. There were all sorts of strange and different things. These various great Daos might lead to different outcomes in the end, and the difficulty of cultivation would be different, but they would all lead to great power and a chance to escape. Therefore, from the moment Luo Fan arrived in the primordial world until now, it had been more than 100 years. Although he did not see many living beings, there were still many. There were astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms, formless talisman ghosts, star beasts, and even innate gods like Fention and Yuan. However, he had never seen two living beings that were not related to each other cultivate the same cultivation system. He had never met a living being that cultivated the same Tao fruit grand Tao as him. From this, it can be seen that in the primordial world, at least at this moment, the possibility of meeting an innate god who had comprehended the same Tao fruit grand Tao as him was probably not higher than him surpassing Pangu overnight. However, the truth was right in front of him. What Mo Luo cultivated was a cultivation technique that was extremely similar to the Tao fruit grand Tao. This could really be considered a miracle. The premise was that this was really a coincidence. Mo Luo frantically devoured the formless talisman ghosts and the formless talisman ghosts that surged in from all directions. The mysterious energy that seemed to be evolving into Dharma power in his body continuously twisted and dispelled all the impurities that filled it. It continuously devoured all the energy that was twisted and dispelled because of the impurities. In the process, it continuously transformed. Network. The process was extremely fast. From the very beginning, only strands of energy could be seen. Until the three-dimensional talisman roughly took shape, only less than half a day had passed. Moreover, the process of evolution was still speeding up with the passage of time. Such a huge and fast energy fluctuation should have caused countless changes in the world and formed an extremely powerful heavenly tribulation. However, for some reason, Mo Luo's body seemed to have another extremely mysterious power. Or it should be said that it was an aura with an unfathomable characteristic. It was this power, this aura, that caused the intense energy change on Mo Luo's body to not cause too much fluctuation. Not to mention attracting the heavenly tribulation of heaven and earth. Even the ground above him, which was only 4,900 miles away, could not sense such a shocking change in the yellow spring below. Mo Luo was born from the extremely and extremely cold cave. The nature of his body was extremely young and extremely net. It embodied a mysterious principle that extreme would give birth to yang. Meanwhile, the mysterious energy that was transforming into Dharma power in his body was extremely and extremely cold. It attracted the formless and formless talisman ghosts around him without any discomfort. He did not even need to use any magical powers. He only needed to release his power, and there would be countless formless and formless talisman ghosts that would automatically come to him. However, they formed a contradictory yet unified whole with his nature, containing some kind of ultimate principle within it. There was an extremely fanatical emotion in Mo Luo's eyes. The intoxicated and infatuated look on his face was as if he was taking drugs. At this moment, one could clearly see the form of the three-dimensional talisman that was continuously taking shape in the power within his body. It was a strange and mysterious form of a door. Although the three-dimensional talisman was only a door, its structure was extremely complicated. Whether it was the frame of the door or the center of the door, they all contained countless interconnected energy lines. At first glance, they looked like a mess of energy lines, as if they were outlining one magical world after another. Just at the moment when Guangpu on the moon broke the world constructed by the Freedom Demon with the help of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, Mo Luo seemed to have felt something. The intoxicated look on his face suddenly changed. In the blink of an eye, it turned into an extremely ferocious and forceful expression. The invisible attractive force produced within his body instantly skyrocketed. As the attractive force skyrocketed, the number of talisman ghosts within the surrounding million miles became even more. The number of talisman ghosts within the surrounding million miles of this location was hundreds of times more than other locations. Although the speed of them continuously surging into Mo Luo's body was fast, there was no danger of them being cut off in a short period of time. From the beginning until now, the number of talisman ghosts that surged into his body was more than 100 billion. However, it only made the distribution of talisman ghosts in this area slightly thinner. There were so many talisman ghosts that surged into his body. Their combined power had long surpassed Mo Luo's by tens of thousands of times. However, after absorbing so many talisman ghosts, Mo Luo still did not feel full at all. Look at how relaxed he was. It was as if he had just drunk a mouthful of cold water. As Mo Luo increased the absorption of the talisman ghosts, the transformation of the three-dimensional talisman amidst the transformation suddenly sped up by many times. Under such circumstances, it only took less than half a day for all the energy in Mo Luo's body to completely transform into three-dimensional talisman characters that were shaped like strange doors. There were a total of 9,999 of these three-dimensional talisman characters. These three-dimensional talisman characters combined into a magical power with some kind of strange nature. It quickly circulated in his meridians that were completely different from those of the born Taoism aptitude. As this magical power circulated, the attractive force produced by his body skyrocketed by many times. The talisman ghost, which would have taken a few days to completely absorb, only took a short while to completely enter his body. They were then instantly twisted and purified by the magical power in his body. In the end, they were completely swallowed up and disappeared without a trace. With the replenishment of these endless talisman ghosts, the magical power in Mo Luo's body had only increased by an indiscernible little bit. The talisman ghosts in the entire Yellow Spring were naturally endless. However, although the number of talisman ghosts that were attracted by Mo Luo was extremely high, it was also limited. They were absorbed by Mo Luo so unscrupulously. Transformation. By the time the magical power in Mo Luo's body completely transformed, all the talisman ghosts within the surrounding 10 million miles had already been consumed. This caused the surroundings of Mo Luo's body to become blank, leaving only Mo Luo's ferocious and gentle coexisting. The combination of ugliness and handsomeness. Although it was not the born Taoism aptitude in the image of Pangu, it also had its own mysterious body suspended in the Yellow Spring. When the last invisible talisman ghost was crushed and absorbed, the magical power in Mo Luo's body was still not satisfied. It continued to search his body for tens of thousands of times. When it seemed that it could not find any more talisman ghosts, it revealed a helpless aura and surged into his dantian, which was also located in his lower abdomen. Then, it suddenly condensed into the size of a fist and kept changing. It was like a struggling monster, like a beating heart, and even more like a strange fruit. It was a strange existence that contained endless mysteries and unimaginable power. Is this the Earth Demon's Tao fruit? After annihilating trillions of living beings, I have finally cultivated you. From now on, I will be the only one in the world. Mo Luo closed his eyes and comprehended the mysterious existence that was condensed by the magical power in his lower abdomen. He opened his eyes and said fervently, Chapter 203. Chapter 203. Divine light overcomes 7 tribulations wrapped in the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light. Guangpu charged out of the world, created by the 12 great freedom heavenly demons. In an instant, she found herself back in her body. At the same time, she also discovered that her physical body was in an extremely dangerous state. Thank goodness I made in time. If I were any slower, I wouldn't have been able to deal with it. The thought flashed through Guangpu's mind, and she began to circulate the defensive method taught by Luo Fan. The energy in her body quickly circulated according to a special route, and complicated and profound mantras flowed through her mind. Following this change, A mysterious light enveloped every part of her body, as if she was wearing a defensive armor. It allowed her body to remain intact under the endless great, God-destroying heavenly lightning. Although the lightning was still wreaking havoc in her body, it couldn't break through the seemingly thin and fragile light and continue to damage her body. At this moment, the 12 freedom heavenly demons suddenly appeared around Guangpu. They weren't destroyed by the endless great, God-destroying heavenly lightning. Instead, they were like fish in water, floating and moving quickly within it. The 12 freedom heavenly demons cackled strangely. At this moment, their rather mysterious, benevolent, dignified, and alluring temperament had disappeared without a trace. All that was left was an indescribable strangeness and uncertainty, as well as a ferocity that wanted to destroy everything. The appearance of these great Freedom Sky demons would undergo tremendous changes almost every second. Perhaps it would make people involuntarily attracted to it at this moment. But in the next moment, it would become extremely ugly and sinister. And in the next moment, it might become attractive again. All sorts of strange forms would appear one after another, and it seemed extremely strange. Looking at their ever-changing appearance, it was as if they were displaying the appearance of billions of heavenly demons. No matter what kind of heavenly lightning it was, no matter what kind of energy it was unleashed from, it would have a certain degree of evil-slaying effects. The great God-destroying heavenly lightning was no exception. However, these great freedom heavenly demons were different. These great Freedom Sky demons were formed from the Freedom Sky demons summoned by the great God-destroying thunder tribulation. The moment they entered the endless starry sky, they were tainted with the aura of the great God-destroying thunder. It could be said that they were the same as the lunar God-destroying thunder, Guangpu's heavenly tribulation. So, even though heavenly demons were innately countered by heavenly lightning, the carefree heavenly demons were one with the great God annihilation, heavenly lightning, to a certain extent. So, they were able to coexist peacefully with heavenly lightning like fish in water. The 12 great freedom heavenly demons were formed by billions of heavenly demons, and each of them was stronger than Guangpu. At this time, they tore off all their disguises and burst out with amazing attacking power. Then, they pounced directly on Guangpu, like tigers pouncing on rabbits, with a dangerous aura. They could swim freely in the lunar God-destroying thunder like fish in water. Moreover, they were in between reality and illusion, so it was extremely difficult to defend against them. In an instant, the 12 great freedom heavenly demons rushed into Guangpu's body along with the lunar God-destroying thunder. Along her meridians, flesh, and blood, they rushed directly to Guangpu's mud-pill palace. For an innate god, especially one who had cultivated to the crossing disaster realm and was close to the consummation, the physical body was important, but the divine soul was even more important. It was the sea of consciousness hidden deep in the mud-pill palace. The great freedom heavenly demons were born with all kinds of divine sense, so they naturally knew which part of the creature in front of them was the most fatal. The moment the heavenly demons entered Guangpu's body, she sensed it and was secretly shocked. Originally, she thought that as long as she broke through the world built by the 12 great freedom heavenly demons, the 12 great freedom heavenly demons would be destroyed. She did not expect that the 12 great freedom heavenly demons could leave the world and attack her directly. At this time, all her mind and strength were used to defend against the lunar God-destroying thunder raging in her body. How could she have the strength to fight against these great freedom heavenly demons? On top of that, these great freedom heavenly devils were extremely fast. She could only stare at them rushing straight in her Naiwan palace. They were going to enter her spiritual ocean through a mysterious place. Right when Guangpu was on the verge of despair, a gray and hazy ray of light suddenly charged out from a mysterious place in her Naiwan palace, and it abruptly coiled around the 12 Masvara, heavenly demons, before twisting once more, and the 12 Masvara, heavenly demons, were minced into pieces. Then, with a violent tremor, the 12 great freedom heavenly demons were completely devoured without even a burp. The whole process was like an image formed by smoke, instead of 12 beings who were stronger than Guangpu in terms of absolute strength. Seeing this, Guangpu heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that this gray light was the innate, inextinguishable spirit light. Although she was shocked that this innate, inextinguishable spirit light could be so powerful that it could easily kill and devour the great freedom heavenly demons, who were stronger than her, she knew that this was not the time to pay attention to this. She calmed down and worked even harder to activate the defensive technique, tried her best to resist the endless lunar god-destroying thunder that was crazily surging into her body. She did not know when it started, but the 10 acres of tribulation cloud above her head had started to shrink. 10 acres, 9 acres, 8 acres as the tribulation cloud shrank. The passage that had formed in the center of the tribulation cloud and led to the unpredictable outer realm seemed to be unable to withstand the terrifying power. It suddenly burst out with a mysterious aura, as if it was struggling on its deathbed, and then completely disappeared. As it disappeared, the aura that Luo Fan was very familiar with completely disappeared. Only Guangpu and the great Yin, god-vanquishing heavenly lightning, were left on the surface of the moon. Another day passed by. The tribulation cloud was finally compressed to its limit, turning into a ball the size of a heavenly pillar. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was sinking, and it came crashing down on Guangpu. Guangpu had endured the ravaging of the heavenly lightning for an entire day. Although she was barely able to defend against the continued ravaging of her body, she was already somewhat exhausted. In the instant that the tribulation cloud transformed into a ball and pressed down, she felt an extremely strange feeling. It was as if a great disaster was coming, as if the sky was falling and the earth was splitting, as if space was shattering. She suddenly looked up. As expected, her feeling was not false. Above her head, the space that was hundreds of feet long had been completely shattered. Between the countless pieces of space, the silver-white lunar god-destroying thunder tribulation cloud, which had been compressed to its limit, came crashing down on her like a huge mountain. At this moment, the pressure that had existed since she had passed the tribulation and firmly restrained her increased by several times. It reached a point where her body trembled indescribably, not to mention leaving the place to avoid the tribulation cloud. Even moving a step was a delusion. In an instant, an indescribable understanding appeared in her heart. This wave of attack was already the last wave of the heavenly tribulation. As long as she could withstand this wave of attack, she would have passed the lunar god-destroying thunder tribulation. And if she couldn't withstand this wave of attack, she would die, her soul would scatter, and there would be no chance of redemption. With this understanding, 2 rays of light shone in Guangpu's eyes. In an instant, countless pieces of information flashed through her mind. All the magic arts, divine abilities, and cultivation methods that she had cultivated since the birth of her spiritual consciousness appeared in an instant. Then they were completely scattered, reorganized, and turned into a mysterious magic art in the blink of an eye. After obtaining this magic art, Guangpu raised her hands high. She didn't use any external objects, but pushed her energy to the limit. She used all the strength she could to activate this magic art. In an instant, all her strength combined and turned into an indescribable, mysterious light. In an instant, it swept through every part of her body and gently pushed back the heavenly lightning that was wreaking havoc and destroying every part of her body. Then, this mysterious light followed the path that the heavenly lightning had opened and rushed out from between her hands. It went straight for the lunar, god-destroying thunder tribulation cloud that was pressing down on her like a huge mountain. It was precisely at this moment of life and death that she suddenly erupted with all her potential. She fused all her strength and produced a power that far exceeded what she could do at this moment. The mysterious light and a lunar, god-destroying thunder collided, producing a light that was enough to blind anyone below the crossing disaster realm. However, there was no sound. Both were annihilated at almost the same time. As the two were annihilated, countless mysterious and unpredictable energy spots spread out and kept sinking. In an instant, they arrived around Guang Pu's body and gradually seeped into Guang Pu's body. Guang Pu's body, which had been charred yellow by the lightning, gradually recovered its vitality and returned to its original jade-like state. At the same time, the innate, inextinguishable divine light that Guang Pu had ignored suddenly appeared and began to swim quickly inside her body. As it absorbed the mysterious spots of light, it also nourished her body. After a long while, the light dissipated. The sky was clear and the surface of the moon was silent. In an area of 10 acres around Guang Pu, there were only specks of mysterious spots of light that surged into her body like moths flying into a flame. Countless impurities fell from Guang Pu's body, and her jade-like body regained its incomparably enchanting and alluring state. When all the mysterious spots of light had entered Guang Pu's body, Guang Pu finally opened her eyes that were like stars and let out a long sigh. She raised her hand and waved it lightly. Countless rays of moonlight condensed and formed a silver celestial robe that covered her body, making her look like a fairy. Chapter 204. Chapter 204. Chapter 204. Guang Pu entered the center of the moon, and Luo Fan entered the underworld. Following her soft words, the energy in her body suddenly became violent. It flowed wildly through her meridians, following the circulation route of the moon's secret art. It condensed with all its might. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into countless three-dimensional talismans in the shape of a bright moon. Although these three-dimensional talismans were only embryonic, they didn't look much different from the real moon-shaped talismans at first glance. It was just that around these three-dimensional talismans, there was a thick, cloud-like energy filling the gaps of the talismans. This was the transformation of the mana in her body was close to the peak, and it seemed that she only needed one last step to succeed. After experiencing the energy that had changed greatly, Guang Pu instantly understood that her 8th and 9th heaven's tribulations would arrive at the same time in many years. She was only one last step away from attaining the earth immortal fruit of Tao. However, that would also be the most dangerous step for her and the greatest challenge. When Guang Pu understood this, there was no panic in her heart at all. Instead, she was full of expectation. What kind of state was the earth immortal fruit of Tao? Although she had a general understanding from Luo Fan and Hong Jun, she couldn't really understand it without attaining it. Even if other people described it to her in an extravagant way, she couldn't really understand it. In the many years that she stepped on the path of cultivation, Guang Pu had guessed how powerful the earth immortal fruit of Tao was, and how powerful it was. Now that she finally touched the edge of the earth immortal fruit of Tao, how could she not look forward to it? After getting the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, Guang Pu found that she had a very mysterious and strange connection with the moon under her feet. This connection was like the whole moon was breathing with her. With a slight thought, she turned around and rushed into the cave that was buried by the crumbling lunar essence. Following the gaps, after half a day, she had already traversed millions of miles and rushed straight into the center of the moon. She also saw the huge three-dimensional talisman in the center of the moon. The moment she saw the 3D talisman, Guang Pu felt a wave of dizziness. It was as if there was a thick fog emerging in her mind, gradually covering her absolute clarity and isolating her from comprehending the 3D talisman. Although she knew that the huge and complicated three-dimensional talisman in front of her contained a huge amount of mystery, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't understand it. This feeling calmed her mind that had just broken through. The thought of, "I'm still far from it," occupied her mind again. With this thought, she shifted her attention away and stopped observing the huge three-dimensional talisman. As she shifted her attention, the thick fog that filled her mind gradually dissipated, and her mind became clear again. Although she couldn't understand the mystery of the three-dimensional talisman, under the guidance of the innate, inextinguishable spiritual light, she easily stepped into the spherical space in the center of the three-dimensional talisman. The inside of this space was filled with endless chaotic vitality, as if it was in a state of chaos before the world was created. After entering here, Guangpu felt as if she had entered her mother's womb, as if she had returned to the state where her spiritual sense was on the verge of being born. An incomparably warm, incomparably safe, and incomparably carefree feeling appeared in her mind. She took a deep breath, and an endless amount of primordial energy rushed in her body like a moth flying into a flame, directly rushing into the energy inside her body. As the energy circulated, it filled the three-dimensional talisman embryonic shapes, constantly strengthening those three-dimensional talisman embryonic shapes. It looked as if the three-dimensional talisman in the shape of the rising moon was constantly absorbing and devouring the chaotic energy around it. Along with this change, the breakthrough she had just made after passing the heavenly tribulation was constantly stabilizing. Seeing this, Luo Fan, who was watching from the top of Buzhou Mountain, no longer had the intention to continue watching. At this moment, he had fallen into some kind of inexplicable shock and bewilderment. This shock and bewilderment was not due to the process of Guangpu's tribulation transcendence, but due to the Mahasvara heavenly demon's insignificant means. The Mahasvara heavenly demon had endless changes, and its attack method was so strange that even Luo Fan couldn't fully understand it. However, what was certain was that it had only constructed a dream world to make Guangpu indulge in it, which was clearly too monotonous and far from the characteristics of the Mahasvara heavenly demon. However, at this moment, the situation had happened. It was as if the Mahasvara heavenly demon was going easy on Guangpu, and this made Luo Fan a little bewildered. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind, and Luo Fan suddenly had a feeling that the Great Tribulation had begun. This very special feeling told him that this Great Tribulation was probably caused by Guangpu's tribulation transcendence. Or rather, it was caused by the Mahasvara heavenly demon. To be more specific, it was caused by the Mahasvara heavenly demon lord, who Luo Fan had predicted would definitely appear, but had yet to appear. After letting out a long sigh, Luo Fan dispelled all kinds of distracting thoughts. At this moment, since the situation was already irreversible, there was no benefit in being bewildered. The most important thing was how to face it. With a slight thought, a mysterious mnemonic chant flowed through his mind. At the same time, his right hand quickly made a hand seal. He used the calculation scroll of the Tao, fruit, and the way scripture to calculate what he should do now to get the most benefits for the Great Tribulation 30,000 years later. This calculation scroll was a collection of the countless spells and divine abilities that Luo Fan had created with the help of Pangu's soul. Its power was naturally many times greater than the yin-yang calculation method, although it still couldn't compare to the earthly, immortal heavenly escape formation. The distance was already incomparable to before. As he calculated, countless pieces of information flashed through his mind. At this time, the great calamity already had a reason, and had even entered the countdown. The difficulty of calculation was naturally much lower than before. In addition, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had improved, allowing Luo Fan to gradually calculate a very rough but general direction of the situation. Below, after a long time, Luo Fan stopped calculating and let out a long sigh. A faint look of doubt appeared on his face. In his calculation, at this time, the best way for him to pass through the Great Tribulation was to go down, and keep going down. Could it be the Yellow Springs? Luo Fan thought. When the name Yellow Springs appeared in his mind, he instantly had a feeling that he had grasped the key. I see. With this feeling, how could he not know that his guess was right? He raised his hand and waved. The limitless void palace rushed out from the depths of the liquid primordial chi ocean. It turned into a yellow light and rushed straight into his sea of consciousness. At the same time, the Xuanji child, who was absorbing the primal chaos origin energy to temper and strengthen himself in the sea of primal chaos origin energy, rushed out at the same time and completely disappeared into Luo Fan's dark blue robe. The Void Wuji Palace returning to the Sea of Consciousness did not have much effect on Luo Fan's aura. However, the integration of Xuanji Boy made Luo Fan's body exude an unbreakable and incomparably stable temperament. After retrieving these two magic treasures, Luo Fan lifted his foot and stepped on the ground lightly. His figure turned into a dark green rainbow, drawing a mysterious and wonderful trajectory in the void, and went straight down to Buzhou Mountain. As for the cave dwelling, although it was not perfect, it was barely enough to guard it with the existence of a yellow turban warrior. "Master, I miss you so much. It's been thousands of years. It's too much to leave me there," the Xuanji Boy complained in Luo Fan's mind again. Her voice was crisp and clear. Although she was saying some useless things, it was not annoying. There was no need to say much about the flying speed of Luo Fan. In just a short while, he had already crossed the 100,000 miles of Buzhou Mountain and arrived at the foot of Buzhou Mountain. With another tremble, the nature of the rainbow changed slightly. A little earth escape property was added. It rushed straight into the ground, as if it was shuttling under the water. After a short while, it passed through 4,900 miles and came to the yellow spring at the bottom of Buzhou Mountain. The rainbow came to the yellow spring and suddenly fell. It condensed again and reformed into the figure of Luo Fan, allowing him to float in the yellow spring water of the yellow spring very easily. This was the source of the entire yellow spring. The amount of heavy and turbid yin qi was extremely shocking. For the invisible talisman ghosts, it was like a paradise. However, Luo Fan's performance was many times stronger than when he stepped into the yellow spring last time. He did not need to use any magical power, any technique, nor did he need the protection of a magic treasure. It was as if he was in the air, quietly floating, almost ignoring the surrounding yellow spring. How can this be? When Luo Fan saw the yellow spring in front of him, he was slightly shocked. In this place, the invisible talisman ghosts were extremely rare, and the visible talisman ghosts could not be found at all. It was completely unlike the scene that the source of the yellow spring, the most mysterious place of the yellow spring, should have. Not like a paradise, but more like a barren ruin. Looking at this scene, a thought suddenly flashed through Luo Fan's mind. This place had been swept not long ago. When this thought appeared, his vigilance was raised to the limit. At this time, the world had just been created. Although there were many living beings in the primordial world, they were extremely rare in the entire primordial world. Under such circumstances, within the hundreds of millions of miles around Buzhou Mountain, Luo Fan did not dare to say that he understood every living being, but there were very few living beings with powerful cultivation that could surpass his confidence. At this time, the yellow spring had been swept not long ago, but it was obviously not done by ordinary living beings. Under his eyes, before the catastrophe, there were such powerful living beings that had escaped his control. This made Luo Fan have countless thoughts in his mind, and his vigilance could be imagined. At this time, he still did not seal his great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes, but he did not have to open them again. Golden and silver light flashed incessantly in his eyes, and he had already seen everything within a radius of 100,000 kilometers. He had also completely grasped the auras that did not belong to the yellow springs that remained in the area. Naturally, it was impossible for living beings to sweep the yellow spring without using any power. As long as they used power, there would naturally be auras left behind. What aura is this? Suddenly, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed lightly. More than 80,000 miles away, there was a strange aura that he grabbed in front of him as if he had grasped something substantial. This was a faint black aura, strands and strands, like the gathering of countless spider webs. Chapter 205. Making wedding clothes for others. This aura, which seemed to be composed of countless strands of spider silk, contained some kind of profound mystery, and also contained some special information about the owner of the aura. Luo Fan carefully comprehended the mystery contained in this aura, and he was more and more surprised. This was the aura left by an innate god. There was no doubt about it. However, the cultivation method cultivated by this innate god was somewhat similar to his Tao fruit great way, which made him feel quite surprised. The reason for this was already mentioned in the previous chapter. The more he comprehended this aura, the more surprised Luo Fan was. His expression remained unchanged, but there were countless waves in his heart. In the end, he exerted force in his hand and casually squeezed, crushing this bit of aura into pieces. He let this aura spread again among the spring water of the underworld, and in the blink of an eye, it was dispersed by the spring water and could no longer be sensed. Through the understanding of this aura, just now Luo Fan had a rough idea of how long this aura had existed, and he also knew when the owner of this aura came here, how long he stayed here, and which direction he went after that. With so much information, it was enough to find the existence of this innate deity. Naturally, there was no need to continue to rely on this aura to infer what was going on with the innate deity who left this aura, which was impossible to infer. With a shake of his body, he had already turned into a dark cyan-long rainbow, rushing straight down the underworld. It's only been a few thousand years. This person should already be in the underworld, and I can find him. Luo Fan thought in his heart. Although he had destroyed that aura, it was impossible for only a tiny bit of aura to be left in the Yellow Springs. With this bit of aura as a guide, he would be able to follow the vine to the melon and finally find out where the existence that emitted the aura was and where he last appeared, unless that person had already left the Yellow Springs. Following the aura to find the owner of the aura, this could only be done in the underworld. If it was on the ground, or in the river, or even in the endless starry sky, this situation would absolutely not happen, because the underworld was condensed from the pure heavy and turbid chi of Een. There's almost no impurity in the underworld. Under such circumstances, any existence that did not belong to the heavy turbid extreme, Een chi would leave traces here. When living beings from the outside world stepped into the Yellow Springs, they would naturally leave behind their auras. This was unavoidable. Moreover, if this creature's power was vigorous, but its control over its aura wasn't perfect, then it would leave behind even more aura, and the amount of time it would remain would be even easier to sense. And if this environment was changed to the void above the ground or the river, because the yuan qi, essence, and other kinds of energy were not pure, it would only take a short period of time for the aura of any living being to be disturbed by the chaotic and mixed energy. In the end, it would completely fuse with all kinds of energy, and it would be difficult to capture. Even with Luo Fan's cultivation realm and the chi capturing scroll recorded in his Tao fruit and the way scripture, he still couldn't capture it. Perhaps in the future, when his cultivation improved, there would come a day when he would be able to grab it, but now was not the time. With the great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes, as well as the little bit of aura that he had just comprehended, Luo Fan no longer needed to stop and grasp the aura to comprehend. He only needed to turn his eyes, and he would be able to see the existence of the aura. That process was just like how people on Earth in the future would mark out countless green beans on a computer. Flying along the traces of the aura, Luo Fan's vigilance increased. At the beginning, although the aura he felt was weak, it was quite scattered and could be sensed by him at will. But as he advanced, although the aura became stronger and the time it remained was closer, the aura became more condensed and harder to sense. There was only one reason for this situation, and that was the cultivation realm and strength of the owner of this aura were rapidly increasing. By calculating the change in the nature of this aura and the time it remained, Luo Fan gradually calculated the improvement speed of the owner of this aura. When it first appeared, it was at the level of a newly born innate god. Although it was quite powerful, it could not hide its immaturity. But it only took a few hundred years for it to become so condensed, and it is actually close to the crossing disaster realm. Luo Fan secretly pondered and was secretly surprised. In fact, there was no fixed realm division for the strength of the innate gods. After all, for the innate gods, it did not have much significance. The starting point of the innate gods was high and low, and there was no fixed distinction, such as what strength they had at birth, how long after they were born, and so on. But Luo Fan had created the Dantian Spirit sculpting technique and the Nine Heaven Sun transformation technique for Luo Fu and Luo Chunyang, these two cultivation methods before the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit. Naturally, there was a general division of the cultivation realm before the Earth Immortal's Tao fruit. Therefore, although he did not have a division of the realms before the innate gods, he could also apply the realm division of the Dantian spirit sculpting technique to the innate gods through comparison. Although it was not necessarily accurate, it could roughly describe the strength of the innate gods. The crossing disaster realm, of course, did not mean that the innate god who left the aura must pass the heaven's tribulation, but it only meant that his cultivation realm had reached the same level as Hong Jun and Luo Fu when they passed the heaven's tribulation. In a few hundred years, he was able to cultivate from a cultivation realm similar to the nature returning realm to the crossing disaster realm. This speed of progress was even faster than Luo Fan himself. This was enough to shock Luo Fan. There were two prerequisites for a fast cultivation speed: cultivation method and aptitude. It was not surprising that a newly born innate god had a strong aptitude, but if there was an extremely mysterious cultivation method that could provide matching aptitude, it was simply a dream to have no teacher to teach. Who is teaching him the cultivation method? Could be Hong Jun. No, if it was Hong Jun who taught it, he would not hide it from me. Although Fu is fun, he also knows how to distinguish between right and wrong. He would definitely not casually teach a cultivation technique. Apart from the two of them, who else could it be? Luo Fan fell in a deep thought, but his speed was not slow at all. It took him 3 days to fly from the bottom of Buzhou Mountain to a position that was 600 million miles away from Buzhou Mountain. Because he flew around the winding Yellow Spring, the distance he walked was even more than this number. At this point, Luo Fan suddenly understood something in his heart. His expression remained unchanged, but his eyes were filled with anger. How dare he change my Dao fruit Dao in such a vicious method? He deserves to be killed. Such a thought echoed in his mind. In a Yellow Spring that was 600 million miles away, almost all the visible talisman ghosts and invisible talisman ghosts were either far or near. These few remaining formless talisman ghosts were only born after the owner of this aura left. Through the disappearance of these talisman ghosts and the growth of the innate god strength, Luo Fan finally figured out the method of the innate god to improve his cultivation. He should have thought of this method, but after all, there were countless ways to achieve the same effect. He had been thinking in his mind, but he could not be sure that the innate god really used that method. After such a long-distance thinking, at this time, there was no doubt. Even if he wanted to find a way to exonerate the innate god, he could not find a reason to convince himself. This innate god actually relied on devouring all living creatures, absorbing their strength, and absorbing their spiritual sense to improve his strength and cultivation realm. This method, seriously speaking, was quite mysterious, but it broke through the bottom line of Luo Fan's mind. For Luo Fan, it was not a problem to absorb the invisible talisman ghosts to refine magic weapons, or even absorb the strength of the talisman ghosts to enhance his strength. Even absorbing the spiritual sense of the talisman ghosts to refine magic weapons was not a big obstacle for him. But to absorb them to enhance his strength, to seize the vitality of hundreds of millions of living creatures to nourish himself, and even to use this as the only way to improve his strength was unacceptable to him. In particular, the cultivation method of this innate god seemed to be the great way of Dao fruit that he had created. This made him feel even more furious. This made him feel that the cultivation method he had created would lead to endless disasters, which naturally made him quite unhappy. Feeling unhappy, Luo Fan's flying speed increased a bit more. After spending another few days, he finally came to the place where Mo Luo had become the Earth Devil Dao fruit 1,080 million miles away. However, at this moment, there was no Mo Luo here. A huge gate that was 10,000 feet high and 3,000 feet wide stood there. This gate was formed by countless mysterious and pure energy lines. Each of the energy lines was like a living creature, constantly twisting and circling around the gate, making mysterious and unpredictable trajectories. The whole gate was real, but it did not look like a real thing. Instead, it looked like a huge three-dimensional talisman. Inside the door, countless energy lines twisted and changed, forming a mysterious and unfathomable outline. It seemed to contain infinite principles, but also seemed to be a random outline without any rules. A strange aura seeped out from it, but it was unable to leave the area within 30 feet of the door. Arg! Roar! Indistinct cries and wails could be heard coming from the door, seemingly pouring into the minds of all living beings that came before the door. However, it was also as if they were inaudible, as if they didn't exist at all. When Luo Fan saw this gate, his expression changed slightly. With a flash of gold and silver light in his eyes, he already knew where this gate led to, and he also knew what it was made of. No wonder he could attain the Tao fruit in just a few thousand years. It turns out that he was just making a wedding dress for someone else. There's no need to be so meticulous. Luo Fan sighed. Chapter 206. Resentment soared into the sky, and the devil disappeared. What the innate God cultivated was indeed a cultivation technique of the Tao fruit, Great Tao. However, the root of this cultivation technique had been changed. Although he could seek to verify the boundlessly mysterious and powerful Tao fruit, he was still unable to do so. However, it was more of a trick, and it did not directly lead to transcendence. The more one cultivated such a cultivation technique, the stronger one's power would be, and the higher one's cultivation realm would be. However, the essence of one's life would become more turbid, and the further one would be from the chance of transcendence. The Tao fruit obtained from this cultivation technique was the Earth Demon Tao fruit. Although it was only one word different from the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, there was a world of difference. The Earth Immortal Tao fruit contained the origin of life, and it resonated with the soul. It contained all kinds of mysterious and indescribable mysteries. However, the Earth Demon Tao fruit was different. It completely incorporated the soul of the cultivator, allowing these two extremely mysterious existences to completely fuse together. After obtaining the Earth Demon Tao fruit, the soul would be the Tao fruit, and the Tao fruit would be the soul. In this way, it was equivalent to abandoning the physical body and turning it into a magic power. It could be said that although this technique was quite mysterious, it had lost the essence of the Tao fruit. Even compared to Fun Tian's primordial spirit, Great Tao, before it was modified by Luo Fan, it was still inferior. The door in front of him was formed from the Earth Demon Tao fruit obtained by this cultivation technique. The power contained within was extremely huge, and it was completely transformed from the physical body of the innate God. After transforming into this door, the spiritual consciousness of the innate God had been completely wiped out. At this moment, the door looked extremely mysterious, but it was just a dead object. This cultivation technique evolved from my Tao fruit, Great Tao, and it also contains such a hidden fatal weakness. The person who evolved this cultivation technique must be the Great Freedom Demon Master. Luo Fan deduced from the result, and a cultivation technique formed by countless words and patterns appeared in his mind. He instantly guessed the origin of this cultivation technique. At this moment, he had already thought it through. In this primordial world, other than him, the only people who understood his Tao fruit, Great Tao cultivation technique were his disciples, sons, and grandchildren. However, outside the primordial world, there was another person who understood his Tao fruit, Great Tao cultivation technique. It was the vast freedom sky demon master who had appeared once when he was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. When the great freedom heavenly demon lord was creating the tribulations for Luo Fan, he had peeped into Luo Fan's memories, so it was not strange that he knew about his cultivation technique. Understanding this, Luo Fan felt relieved in his heart. The unknown was the scariest. Previously, Luo Fan did not know the cause of the great trial, nor did he know why the great freedom demonic lord did not seize the opportunity to enter the untainted land when Guangpu was going through the trial. Now that he understood the method the great freedom demonic lord used to enter the untainted land, Even though the situation was still bad and there were still some unsolved questions, he felt much more at ease. The world that the door led to was the freedom incarnation outside the realm, and it was a one-way passage. One could only enter the untainted world from the freedom incarnation, but not from the untainted world to the freedom incarnation. On the other hand, the strange screams that faintly sounded out from the door were coming from the Mahesvara demon within the Mahesvara, and it was strange, mysterious, and unfathomable to the extreme. Luo Fan sighed. He raised his hand, and an invisible force acted on the door. He exerted a little force, and was about to crush the door into pieces so that it would turn back into various kinds of energy and disperse into the water of the underworld. However, just as he was about to make his move, he suddenly thought of something. It is very likely that the great trial this time came from the great freedom demonic lord. If I can understand the freedom incarnation, it will definitely be easier for me to pass through the trial. With the existence of this one-way door, I should be able to research the way to the freedom incarnation. If I destroy it just like that, it will be too much of a waste, he thought. As he thought of this, his hand changed, and countless strange energy threads condensed from the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace by Luo Fan. Like countless living creatures, they stuck to the huge door and swam quickly on its surface. After a short while, it had already condensed into a silk cocoon, tightly wrapping around the huge door, forming a huge and mysterious seal. As the seal was formed, the mysterious aura that the door gave off instantly disappeared. It was completely isolated by the seal, and it could no longer be sensed by the outside world. However, after the aura was concealed, a towering resentment rushed out of the door. It passed through the obstruction of the seal and pressed down on the surroundings. It caused the yellow springs within a radius of 1,000 miles to become violent, like a pot of boiling soup. Why? Why did you do this to me? I was loyal to my mother. Why did you abandon me? Why? Why? The soundless howls that could make even a stone-hearted person feel pity entered Luo Fan's ears. Luo Fan sighed in his heart. He knew that this was the resentment left behind by the innate god, and he could not help but feel pity for the innate god. At this moment, he had a general understanding of what had happened to the innate god, but all he could do was sigh. He raised his hand and waved. As the magic power in his body flowed, a mysterious aura filled with endless calming energy was born from the void and instantly washed the door 108,000 times. Although the innate god's resentment was deep, he was dead after all. For Luo Fan, it was quite easy to dispel his resentment. With these 108,000 washes, the resentment completely dissipated, and the seal returned to its normal state. He raised his hand and waved. The seal shrank rapidly and quickly floated towards Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a fist-sized small door lying in his hand. Holding the small door, Luo Fan carefully observed it and found that the seal was very tight and strong. Even if the innate god was resurrected, he would not be able to break it. The expression on his face didn't change, and there was a bit of relaxation in his eyes. He casually threw the small portal into the mini Kiliacosm inside the Wuji Palace, and then suddenly sank, sealing it in the center of the mini Kiliacosm sun. It was placed together with the countless extraterrestrial demons that had turned into statues. Then, its power was constantly extracted and transformed into the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun, which shone on the whole central continent and gave it endless vitality. At this point, Luo Fan was completely relieved. After all, this door was formed by an innate god who had attained the fruit of Tao. Although the fruit of Tao was very fake, it was still a fruit of Tao. Moreover, it led to the Mahesvara demon lord's Mahesvara heaven. Even if it was sealed, Luo Fan could not be completely at ease. He was worried whether the extraterrestrial demons would break the seal. But now it was different. The true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun were existences of extreme yang, and they were innately aware of all evil demons. Even if a Mahesvara demon could break his seal and enter the small Kiliacosm through the door, he would still be wrapped by the true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun naturally. he would not be able to wreak havoc under the extreme yang power. Therefore, he did not have to worry anymore. As Luo Fan's eyes turned, his mind had already illuminated the area within a radius of 100,000 miles, carefully searching for all the auras within this area. However, the result was obvious. He did not find any auras other than the innate god. It was as if no other living beings had stepped into this area at all. As expected, the Mahesvara Demon Lord's cultivation realm improved faster than I expected. Luo Fan sighed. He naturally knew that the absence of auras did not mean that nothing came out of the door. It only meant that the existence that came out of the door had mastered the aura to the point of perfection, and had even reached the point where there was no trace of the aura dissipating. And this existence was most likely the Mahesvara Demon Lord. Although he knew that it would be difficult to find anything even if he continued to search, Luo Fan still did not want to give up. He raised his hand and pointed between his eyebrows. The Wuji Void Palace turned into a khaki light and rushed out from between his eyebrows. It wrapped around his body. As the khaki light wrapped around his body, Luo Fan instantly felt that the range of his perception had expanded by many times. The Yellow Spring Valley, which was 6 million miles long and 100,000 miles wide, appeared in his mind. It was so detailed that almost no details were missed. However, there was also no gain. Since he had already used his ultimate move, Luo Fan would not give up just like that. With a slight change of his mind, the khaki light formed by the Wuji Void Palace turned and rushed down the Yellow Spring Valley with his body. The speed was so fast that it was almost as if it was teleporting. After a few breaths, he was already covered by the Wuji Void Palace and had crossed a distance of thousands of miles. Outside the distance of thousands of miles, the Yellow Spring Valley instantly changed. The invisible talisman ghost that he had not seen for a long time gradually increased. Among them, the visible talisman ghosts appeared again. Luo Fan's thoughts changed. He already knew that it was because they were out of the range of influence of the innate deity, so he wasn't surprised. He just carefully sorted out any unusual aura that might exist in the Yellow Spring. Unfortunately, there was no surprise. After flying for more than 3 billion miles, Luo Fan finally confirmed that the Mahesvara Demon Lord was no longer in the Yellow Spring. He was a little disappointed, but also a little surprised. With a change of his mind, the khaki light formed by the Wuji Void Palace suddenly changed direction and rushed up with his body. After a short while, it rushed out of the ground and came to the surface. This place was already more than 4 billion miles away from Buzhou Mountain. At this place, Buzhou Mountain had already become an imperceptible blurry dot, even with the golden eyes of the great sun and bright moon silver eyes. However, the surrounding environment did not seem to have changed much from the surroundings of Buzhou Mountain. The terrain was undulating, chaotic qi was everywhere, and the density of the innate vitality was not reduced at all. After looking around, Luo Fan took a step and came to the front of a cave halfway up a nearby mountain. This cave was filled with wisps of chaotic qi, and there was some kind of obscure and unfathomable life force in it. Seeing this, Luo Fan knew that even if there was no innate deity in this cave, there must be some kind of living creature. This distance of more than 3 billion miles took Luo Fan a total of 10 days. At this time, he was already a little annoyed. Suddenly seeing a chance of survival in front of him, he would not let it go. Standing in front of the cave, he released his power, and there was an imposing manner that soared into the sky, almost covering the sky and the earth, rushing into the depths of the cave. After a long time, there was not much change in the life force, and no living creature came to cause trouble for Luo Fan. Luo Fan knew that the living creature must be in existence with incomplete spiritual consciousness, and he sighed in his heart. Withdrawing his own imposing manner, he took a step and stepped into the cave. This cave first went up for thousands of feet, then turned straight down, and only after going down for hundreds of thousands of feet was the bottom of the cave. Chapter 207. Golden and White Apes. Rebirth from a drop of blood. This was a gray ape that was hundreds of feet tall. It lay quietly on the ground, its abdomen rising and falling, and a huge turbid airflow was constantly expanding and contracting from its mouth and nose. Its loud snoring was like thunder, and the whole cave seemed to shake slightly with its breathing. Luo Fan's body was only the size of a normal person, and under the reflection of this ape, he was like an ant. But compared with the vigorous power of his body, this ape was like an ant. As soon as Luo Fan saw this gray ape, he knew that it was a post-celestial being born from the intercourse of two innate gods. It contained two kinds of power sources, which seemed a little mixed and impure, but there was a certain mystery in it. Master, this big guy is so interesting. Why don't you fuse him with me? That way, I can save many years of refining. At this time, the voice of Xuanji Boy appeared in Luo Fan's mind again. Luo Fan knew that Xuanji Boy was a protective magic treasure, and it had the ability to absorb all things to strengthen itself. The ape below was born from the intercourse of two innate gods. Although its nature was inferior to that of innate gods, its physical body was strong and tough, and ordinary innate gods could not compare with it. If it was fused into the Xuanji robe, it could greatly strengthen the Xuanji robe, and it could improve the Xuanji robe. However, Luo Fan would not make such a choice. Although he did not have much psychological barriers to fusing living creatures into the magic treasure to strengthen its power, this did not mean that he would be crazy enough to fuse all the living creatures he could find into the magic treasure. Besides, since this post-celestial ape was born from the intercourse of two innate gods, there were naturally two innate gods nearby. Although he was confident, he did not rule out that there were innate gods in the untainted land who could defeat him. Under such circumstances, he directly treated the Xuanji Boy's words as complaints and directly ignored them. As soon as he landed, he was already above the head, hovering about 30 feet above its nostrils. He looked down at the head, which was more than 100 feet in size. Accompanied by the loud snoring, he did not feel the pressure of facing a gigantic creature. Instead, he felt a sense of charmingly naive and charmingly naive. Suddenly, the ape seemed to feel something. The muscles and hair on its face twitched a few times, smacked its lips, and suddenly raised a big hand. In the blink of an eye, it had already arrived behind Luo Fan, sweeping at Luo Fan a few times as if it was driving away mosquitoes. How fast was Luo Fan's reaction? Naturally, he would not be affected by this unintentional sweep. With a few flashes of his body, he had already dodged the sweep of this large hand. In a few flashes, he had already dodged the sweep of the big hand. The big hand waved a few times and seemed to find that there was nothing there. It pressed down and scratched its childish and naive ape face. In an instant, the naivety became even stronger, making Luo Fan feel warm. After a while, seeing that the ape had fallen unconscious again, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. Through the great sun-golden eyes and the bright moon-silver eyes, he had already seen the situation below the ape in the blink of an eye. On the back of the azure ape's spine, right behind the dantian, there was a small source of chaotic energy. It was only 30 feet in diameter, but it was exceptionally condensed. It looked as black as ink and contained an extremely large amount of chaotic energy. Moreover, what surprised Luo Fan even more was that this source of chaotic vitality had obviously been processed by living creatures. On the surface of this source of chaotic vitality, there were 1,296 patterns. These patterns were alternating between blue and yellow, exuding a sense of water and earth, containing a strong sealing power. Luo Fan looked carefully and knew that these patterns were laid down by two innate gods. The blue pattern was condensed by the chaotic water essence, and the yellow pattern was condensed by the chaotic earth essence. Combined with the power in the gray ape, Luo Fan knew that this should be a means set up by the ape's parents. It seems that the two innate gods should be rushing here now. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and he looked around. This made him see some things that he had overlooked before. On the wall of the deep cave, there seemed to be no pattern, but in fact, quite mysterious carvings. These carvings were shallow and deep, and the power was condensed without dispersing. It was carved by a living creature that had already achieved Tao. Although its power was not strong, it was quite mysterious, as if it had the ability to sense every living creature that stepped into this cave, every force, and could transmit this information to a faraway place through some mysterious method. Luo Fan noticed these carvings, and after a brief analysis, he knew that this was the defense method of the ape's parents. Thinking about it, it was the truth. Since their descendants were here, how could they open the cave so casually for people to come and go? It could even be said that the reason why Luo Fan could come here without a sound was because his cultivation realm was much higher than the two innate gods, and he did not activate the defense method that they had left behind. As expected, just as Luo Fan realized this, there was a deep and anxious voice that blasted from outside the cave, rolling down like thunder in Luo Fan's ears. It even made Luo Fan feel that his eardrums were ringing, and there was a stabbing pain. "Which master is playing in my son's residence? Please come out and meet me." The voice was deep, and the language used was very strange, and it was not any language that Luo Fan knew. However, the thoughts contained within were clear and unmistakable. Even an ordinary person would be able to understand its meaning, let alone someone with an extremely high cultivation like Luo Fan. Playing? That's a good word. Luo Fan laughed in his heart, but he did not go too far and said, "My friend, please forgive me. I sense the existence of living creatures here, and I came to see you, but I did not expect you to be my friend's son. Please forgive me." As he spoke, he had already used his perception to bring the innate god into his mind. It was a 10,000 feet tall, golden-haired ape with a ferocious face, and the hair on his body was golden under the sunlight. The aura on his body was strong and condensed, and there was an indescribable aura coming from his body. Just by looking at this aura, it was not inferior to Hongjun. Boom, 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 boom. Suddenly, there was a loud roar from afar, and the ground shook slightly. Luo Fan's mind moved. He didn't need to rely on the perception enhancement of the limitless Void Palace. A white ape emerged in his mind's thoughts. It was rushing towards this location at a high speed. Its body, demeanor, and lines were soft, and a feminine beauty gushed out. Obviously, it was a female ape. However, the white ape's strength was a notch weaker than the golden ape's. If there was a distinction, the golden ape was like a cultivator who had achieved fruit of Tao, and the white ape was like a crossing disaster realm. Although there was not much difference between the two, there was an essential difference. At least, the golden ape could travel with the wind, and it could approach the 10,000 feet tall mountain without a sound, while the white ape could only run on the ground. Luo Fan took a step forward, and in an instant he crossed hundreds of thousands of feet and appeared in front of the cave. The giant ape that was 10,000 feet tall seemed to be a small scale, but if one were to see it face to face, it would be extremely shocking. Oh, I see. The golden ape was rather simple, and after listening to Luo Fan's explanation, it did not suspect anything, and it laughed. This was the normal behavior of the innate gods. After all, compared to the huge scale of the untainted world, the number of innate gods could be said to be very small, and the interaction between the various innate gods was naturally also very small. As a result, most of the innate gods could only explore alone from birth to Tao, and it was difficult for them to find innate gods to communicate with. Without any interaction with other innate gods, they naturally appeared simple and simple. "My child, how is my child? What happened?" The white ape had also arrived at this moment, and it asked the golden ape anxiously. The indescribable motherly nature was revealed in a straightforward manner. "I'm sorry, I was reckless, and caused you two to misunderstand," Luo Fan hurriedly said. It's okay, it's okay. This expert must be anxious to see living beings. If it were us, we would also do the same," the golden ape said, patting the white ape's back. "Fortunately, my child is fine." At this moment, the white ape also sensed the situation of its child, and it was only then that it was relieved. Luo Fan repeatedly expressed his embarrassment. The golden ape and the white ape expressed that there was no need to worry, and they were even extremely happy because of Luo Fan's arrival. After all, Luo Fan was the only innate god they had met since they were born, and he was on par with them. As for the size of Luo Fan's body, it was not a problem for the innate gods. During this exchange, Luo Fan also learned the names of the two apes. The golden ape was called Yuan Tong. The white ape was called Yuan Shi. The two were born in the same chaotic vitality source, and they were naturally attracted to each other. Finally, after they were born, they naturally became husband and wife, and finally gave birth to the acquired azure ape in the depths of the cave tens of thousands of years ago. The method that Yuan Shi and Yuan Tong cultivated was also quite strange, but it was the pattern Tao. Moreover, the direction of cultivation was to strengthen one's body, so that the more one cultivated, the bigger and more tenacious the body would be, and the more power it would contain. Looking at Yuan Tong's current strength, his body had already undergone some kind of essential change. Every cell of his body had turned into a strange pattern, piled up together, and could disperse and gather. There were also incredible almighty abilities such as blood rebirth, flying in the sky, burrowing into the ground, and moving mountains and seas. The blood rebirth could allow him to become a complete Yuan Tong again, no matter what kind of injury he suffered. As long as there was a drop of blood and a little bit of skin and hair, it was equivalent to an immortal body. Chapter 208. The Great Tao of Patterns and the Exchange of Methods. Rebirth from a single drop of blood. Cultivating the Great Tao of Patterns to the realm of Tao validation has such a miraculous ability. Luo Fan was shocked to hear that Yuan Tong could be reborn from a single drop of blood. Rebirth from a single drop of blood was a heaven-defying ability. Even if Luo Fan had attained the Earth Immortal Tao fruit, he would only have two sources of life, the spirit and the Tao fruit. If both were destroyed, then he would die no matter how powerful he was. Compared to the Great Tao of Patterns ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood, he was much weaker in terms of survivability. I didn't quite believe it when I first cultivated the body of immortality. Please take a look, fellow Taoist. Yuan Tong laughed when he saw Luo Fan's surprise. With that, he shook his hand, and his right pinky finger broke off from the root with a crack. It left his palm in the blink of an eye and fell straight down. Yuan Tong's body was tens of thousands of meters tall. Even though he was sitting down, his finger was still several thousand meters above the ground. The falling of a severed finger was like a giant pillar falling from the sky, possessing an indescribable power. Countless patterns seemed to flash on the pinky finger as it fell. Amidst the flashes of light, the cells on the pinky finger moved and reorganized in a frenzy, gradually changing shape. When it finally landed on the ground, it had turned into a golden ape that was 60 meters tall. It was a shrunken version of Yuan Tong. This shrunken version of Yuan Tong smiled at Luo Fan in front of him. Greetings, fellow Taoist. Luo Fan knew the duo's name from their previous exchange, and they naturally knew Luo Fan's name as well. However, they no longer referred to Luo Fan as a mighty expert. Luo Fan and Yuan Tong were very different in size, but Luo Fan didn't use any techniques to make himself bigger. He didn't sit at the same height as Yuan Tong and Yuan Tong's heads, either. He simply sat on a rock on the ground like them. The difference in size between the two sides was huge, but there was nothing unnatural about it. Luo Fan didn't seem small, and Yuan Tong and the other two didn't seem tall either. At this time, when Luo Fan saw the golden ape greeting him, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. It was indeed rebirth from a single drop of blood. He didn't want to be rude, so he bowed to return the greeting before saying, "Fellow Taoist, you're an almighty being. It's truly incredible." Yuan Tong chuckled and waved his hand. The 20-meter-tall golden ape leaped into the air, arriving at where Yuan Tong's hand was in the blink of an eye. It suddenly turned around and transformed back into a fluffy golden finger that returned to Yuan Tong's hand. If fellow Taoist wishes to obtain this technique, I am willing to teach it to you. I just need you to agree to one of my requests. Yuan Tong chuckled. When Yuan Tong was testing out the technique, Luo Fan had already seen through some of its mysteries. However, this technique had already pushed the great Tao of pattern Tao to its limits. Even with his golden eyes of the sun and silver eyes, it was difficult for Luo Fan to see through the intricacies of the technique in such a short amount of time. Although he would definitely be able to obtain this technique if he studied it properly in the future, it would still take a lot of time. As such, after seeing the technique, Luo Fan had been thinking about how to ask Yuan Tong and Yuan Tong for this technique. Hearing Yuan Tong's words, he was secretly delighted. To tell you the truth, fellow Taoist, I am indeed quite interested in your great Tao of pattern Tao. Do you have any requests? Feel free to speak your mind. Yuan Tong exchanged a look with Yuan Shi, who had been standing quietly to the side. Both of them revealed expressions of joy and apprehension. Fellow Taoist has seen my son before. He is a postnatal life form, and his talent is far inferior to us connate life forms. However, the great Tao of pattern Tao has extremely high requirements for talent. If my son cultivates the great Tao of pattern Tao, it will be extremely difficult for him to achieve anything in the future. I see that your cultivation technique is different from the great Tao of pattern Tao, but it also contains endless mysteries. I wonder if there's a way for my son to return to connate life forms? If there is, I am willing to trade the great Tao of pattern Tao for it. Yuan Tong said sincerely. I see. How pitiful of parents. Luo Fan finally understood what Yuan Tong and his wife wanted and sighed inside. However, he had to admire Yuan Tong's foresight. From the moment they met, Luo Fan had only used a bit of his ability to get from the bottom of the cave to the entrance. Who would have thought that such a small movement would allow Yuan Tong to see through the mysteries of his cultivation technique? Fellow Taoist's love for his son is truly admirable. It can be considered a coincidence. It will be difficult for you to ask anyone else, but you've asked the right person. Because I have a son and a grandson who are also postnatal life forms, I've spent a lot of effort to deduce a few methods for postnatal life forms to return to connate life forms. I should have given them to you for free, but I really yearn for your great Tao of pattern Tao, so I'm shamelessly exchanging them with you. Luo Fan smiled. Fellow Taoist really has such a method. The ape mantis eyes were filled with incomparable surprise. She rushed forward and opened her big hands to pounce on Luo Fan. Her movements were so huge that it caused a violent vibration, as if the earth was quaking and the mountains were shaking. Hey, calm down. Yuan Tong was calmer. Although he was overjoyed, he still retained his rationality. He quickly pulled Yuan Tong back and stopped her from expressing her joy in such an inappropriate manner. Yuan Tong only came back to her senses after being pulled back by Yuan Tong. She quickly retracted her arms and said with some embarrassment, "My apologies, I was too excited. Please forgive me, fellow Taoist. Don't worry about it. I was once a father, so I can completely understand your love for your child." Luo Fan didn't care. His cultivation level was much higher than Yuan Tong's, and Yuan Tong's actions posed no threat to him. So why would he care? Yuan Tong couldn't stand it any longer. He grabbed at the air, and a 1,000-meter-wide, steel-like rock shot into the sky from a few 100,000 meters away. It landed in his hand in the blink of an eye. He rubbed his hands together, and the steel-like rock changed shape like tofu. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a stone slab that was 3,000 meters long and 30 meters thick. Then he raised his hand and swiped it across the stone slab. Countless patterns appeared on the stone slab, flashing and changing constantly. In the blink of an eye, it had formed an extremely strange pattern that seemed to contain endless mysteries. It also looked like a scribble. Seeing that the pattern had taken shape, Yuan Tong gently sent the slate over to Luo Fan. "It's really big." Luo Fan's eyes couldn't help but twitch. What did a stone slab that was 3,000 meters long and 30 meters thick look like? One had to know that he was less than 10 feet tall, and the 10 feet thick stone slab was equivalent to the height of a dozen of him stacked on top of each other. In addition, the stone slab was thousands of feet long. The stone slab placed in front of him was like a huge square. Thankfully, The stone slab was made from ordinary stone, so it wasn't difficult for Luo Fan to change its size. As such, he waved his hand, and an invisible force acted on the stone slab. This invisible force was extremely profound, and it seemed to contain some kind of inconceivable power. When it acted on the stone slab, it gradually changed in a strange way. The entire stone slab gradually shrank and compressed. After a short while, it had shrunk into a stone slab that was 3 feet long and as thin as paper. It still looked a little big, but it was a lot better than before. When Yuan Tong saw Luo Fan's actions, he realized that he had overlooked something. He couldn't help but embarrassedly scratch the back of his head and gave a simple and honest smile. Yuan Tong pinched Yuan Tong's waist in dissatisfaction. He clearly felt that Yuan Tong was being rude, and he was worried that it would make Luo Fan unhappy and affect his son's future. It's quite profound indeed. It's quite different from my pattern scrolls. Looks like it's better to specialize in one than to be all-rounder, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. The patterns on the stone slab were complicated and profound. If it was a regular person, they would only need to take a look to have their spiritual consciousness crushed by the mysteries within. However, to Luo Fan, it was more intuitive to record a cultivation method like this than using words, and the amount of information recorded was even greater. As a result, he only needed a glance to understand the mysteries of the patterns on the stone slab. He understood the origin of the Great Way of Pattern. Turning the spirit into a pattern and fusing it with the body will change the nature of the body. In the end, the spirit will become the body, and the body will become the spirit. At that time, every drop of essence blood and every strand of hair will contain the essence of life. No wonder it can be reborn from a single drop of blood. Luo Fan was rather disappointed. The Great Way of Pattern contained endless mysteries, and the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood was almost nature-defying. However, it was in a completely different direction from the Great Way of Fruits. To Luo Fan, he could only refer to the method of training the body. It was impossible for him to obtain the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood with this cultivation method. After all, the Great Way of Fruits was the fruit of cultivation and the spirit of cultivation. Although it did not give up on the tempering of the body, it was not the main focus. If the spirit and the body were completely fused, the spirit would be the body, and the body would be the spirit. This was completely the opposite of the cultivation method of the Great Way of Fruits. It would only add countless obstacles to his path of cultivation. It would greatly weaken the power of his spells. It was not worth it to do this for the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood. However, it's not like I didn't gain anything. Although I still don't know how to cultivate it, perhaps I can use another method to achieve rebirth from a single drop of blood. Luo Fan thought. He had completely calmed down when he thought of this. He looked up and said, "This method is extremely profound. You are truly a genius to be able to create this method." "Ha! I was just lucky." Yuan Tong laughed. Chapter 209. Pattern returning to origin technique. These strange and mysterious patterns were what Luo Fan had created by borrowing the method that Yuan Tong had used just now. He had incorporated a technique that he had created at the last minute into the pattern. The cultivation technique that Luo Fan had created was the diagram reverting to origin technique, allowing the spirit to return to the connate state and raising its aptitude to the same level as the connate gods was just a concept. Although there were many mysteries contained within, and those who did not know would not be able to figure it out even if they racked their brains. One only needed to understand the key points to be able to incorporate it into any technique. When Luo Fan first created the Primordial Core Soul sculpting technique, he had spent tens of thousands of years to clearly study the key points of the technique. Only then was he able to create a technique that almost went against the natural order. When he had created the 9 Heaven Sun transformation technique for Luo Chunyang in the future, he had only incorporated Luo Chunyang's body, aptitude, and essence into the key points that he had comprehended. He had even only needed a few thoughts to form that mysterious technique. Naturally, it was the same now. Although the pattern Great Tao and the fruit Great Tao were two completely different cultivation directions. Their essence was the same. They both sought to verify the great Tao that existed in the unseen world, so there were some similarities between them. The key points that allowed the spirit to return to the connate state could also be applied to the pattern great Tao. Moreover, he had already used his gold and silver eyes to clearly see Yuan Tong's descendant, the water and earth gray ape. He had a complete grasp of his essence. Now that he combined the pattern great Tao that Yuan Tong had cultivated with the two, he could easily incorporate the method of returning to the connate state. It was also completely compatible with the water and earth gray ape, allowing him to cultivate with twice the results with half the effort. If he cultivated this method, the water and earth gray ape would be able to improve at an extremely fast rate. In the end, after passing through several heavenly tribulations, he would naturally be able to cultivate an immortal body and become a supreme being that could be reborn from a single drop of blood. He would be able to directly wrap the pattern great Tao within it. After memorizing the cultivation method on the stone slab, he raised his hand and gently pushed it. The stone slab floated up and expanded continuously during the process. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to its original length of 10,000 feet. It was a huge stone slab that was as large as a public square. Although Yuan Tong was surprised that Luo Fan had managed to learn the method he had used to record his cultivation method on a single look, he didn't ask about it because he was concerned about the cultivation method that could allow his son to revert to his past self. He only hurriedly took the stone slab and carefully examined it. On the side, Yuan Mang was naive and did not understand the ways of the world. In his anxiety, he no longer hesitated and leaned over to examine the stone tablet with Yuan Tong. They carefully studied the cultivation method recorded on the stone tablet. Qi condensation, core formation, divine flame, return to the past, tribulation crossing, undying. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The ape comprehended the technique on the stone slab and muttered the word wonderful 3 times in a row. It was clear that he was extremely excited and could not control himself. This cultivation method was not just wonderful. It had simply expanded the scope of his great Tao of patterns by more than 100 times. Not only was it suitable for his son to cultivate, but even he could comprehend many wondrous techniques that he had never comprehended before. The great Tao of pattern that he cultivated was specialized and could cultivate his corporeal body to the limit. On the other hand, the great Tao of pattern that Luo Fan had created was extensive and could develop all the divine abilities that the great Tao of pattern could have. This cultivation method was like opening a door to an unknown world in front of Yuan Tong. It made him feel like his strength would increase at a fundamental level and that he would be able to use the divine arts of the undying body to the limit. In addition, the great Tao of patterns Yuan Tong cultivated had extremely high requirements. Without great comprehension, great control over the body, and great aptitude, it was impossible to cultivate. This could be seen from the fact that their son, who was born from 2 innate gods with great aptitude, could not meet the requirements of cultivation. But Luo Fan's diagram back to the past technique not only contained a wide range of divine arts, but it also lowered the requirements of aptitude to the minimum. As long as one had a spiritual consciousness and knew how to cultivate to the level of a living being, one could continuously improve their aptitude through this cultivation method. In the process, one's body would constantly grow until they finally reached the undying realm of this cultivation method. With the undying body, one would be able to be reborn from a single drop of blood, move mountains and seas, and travel through the sky and earth. They were almost omnipotent. Though Yuan Tong's cultivation level was lower, he could clearly see how profound the cultivation method Luo Fan had recorded was. He was extremely excited in the blink of an eye. Yuan Tong will never forget fellow Taoist's great kindness. Yuan Tong carefully stuffed the stone slab into his body and used the divine arts developed by the undying body to hide the stone slab. His voice was deep and resounding like thunder. At this moment, because of his excitement, it contained an even more overwhelming grandeur. Luo Fan waved his hand and said, "We're just taking what we need. There's no need to thank me." fellow Taoist diagram Tao is also very beneficial to me. There's no need to say more, fellow Taoist. Yuan Tong is not an ungrateful person. I'll remember this and will definitely repay you in the future, Yuan Tong said firmly. Tong, why don't we let little Lei thank you? Yuan Tong seemed to be unable to wait any longer. However, everyone could see what she meant. She just wanted her son to cultivate this cultivation method as soon as possible. There's no need to thank me, but this is a newly created method after all. While I'm here, let's let your son cultivate it first. If there are any problems, we can make up for it as soon as possible. Luo Fan smiled. Seeing that both his wife and Luo Fan said this, Yuan Tong followed their advice. He raised his hand and reached into the cave. No one knew what he did, but the entire mountain shook with his movement. After a long while, the tremors subsided, and Yuan Tong pulled back his right hand. In his hand was a gray ape that was 300 meters tall, sleeping soundly. The extremely compressed, chaotic vital energy source also floated behind the gray ape as it came out. Don't be noisy. I still want to sleep. After being caught, the ape's hand scratched everywhere as if it was very unwilling. Its voice was clear, but it was as tender as a 2-year-old baby's. That's convenient. Luo Fan saw this and knew that Yuan Tong had used great force to break out of the cave. He was full of praise for the physical body that the diagram Tao cultivation method could produce. This kind of power was several times stronger than his own. Coupled with the size of his body, this power was even more terrifying. Based on Luo Fan's concerns, if he continued to cultivate like this, he might even be able to control the sun and moon. You stinky brat. Hurry up and wake up. Yuan Tong grabbed the gray ape and slapped him on the butt. The force he used was very appropriate. Although it was strong, it only made the ape feel pain, not injury. Ah, that hurts. The ape woke up from the pain and said unhappily. He opened his eyes and looked around, and only then did he realize what kind of situation he was in. Hey, this little ape is so interesting. It's small and hairless. Although the water-gray ape was only a post-celestial creature, its aptitude was naturally too poor compared to innate gods like Luo Fan. However, in terms of absolute aptitude and strength, it was extremely powerful. At this moment, it saw Luo Fan at a glance and said with some surprise, "This is your benefactor. Your benefactor is the one who taught you the cultivation method. Why aren't you thanking him?" Yuan Tong was furious when he heard the ape say this, and he slapped the apes, but again, Luo Fan stopped him. There's no need to say that, fellow Taoist. Calling him a benefactor is too much. Besides, this is just a small matter. It's better to quickly teach him the cultivation method and let him cultivate it. It's more important to see how effective it is. Yuan Tong's heart was already aching when she saw how Yuan Tong treated her baby, but she couldn't say anything in front of Luo Fan. When she heard Luo Fan say this, she looked gratefully at Luo Fan and snatched the ape back. That's right, that's right. Yuan Tong couldn't help but smile wryly and glare at the ape. Yup. The ape was very proud and made a face at Yuan Tong and Luo Fan. Luo Fan found this innocent and pure look quite amusing, but he didn't dislike it in the slightest. Seeing that Luo Fan didn't mind, Yuan Tong didn't bother with the ape's impoliteness. In fact, he didn't really know what politeness was either. After pausing for a moment, he imparted the basic cultivation technique of the pattern returning to origin technique taught by Luo Fan to the gray ape. Although this water-gray ape was a few tens of thousands of years old, its growth was extremely slow. At this moment, it was only equivalent to a 2- or 3-year-old infant. Although it matured very early, it was inferior to a true adult, so it was naturally impossible for it to directly pass down the entire cultivation technique to him. This ape's name was Ape Thunder. It was a name that Yuan Tong had thought of for thousands of years before coming up with. It contained their hopes for him. However, Ape Thunder was a postnatal life form, so he didn't have the qualifications to cultivate their grand owl pattern. This worried the couple for tens of thousands of years. They had traveled hundreds of millions of miles and searched for hundreds of connate gods, but they couldn't find any way for Ape Thunder to cultivate their grand owl pattern. That was why they gradually became disappointed and lowered their requirements. They only wanted Ape Thunder to have some achievements and didn't expect him to cultivate the Grand Tao pattern. However, even this requirement was difficult to fulfill. However, they never imagined that they would encounter Luo Fan by chance today. Not only would Luo Fan be able to help Yuan Lei achieve something in the future, but he would also be able to help Yuan Lei cultivate the Grand Tao patterns. This simply made them overjoyed, and it was precisely because of this that they acted so urgently at this moment. This cultivation method is so interesting. It's much more fun than Dad's. Ape Thunder murmured as countless strange lines flashed through his eyes. Yuan Tong glanced at Luo Fan with some embarrassment, but Luo Fan just smiled and pretended not to hear. At this time, Ape Thunder was floating in the air with the source of chaotic vital chi, sitting cross-legged above it. Chapter 210. 9 days of pill formation. Yuan Tong and his wife had created this method of channeling chaotic vital chi out of desperation. It was a method that would allow Yuan Lei to achieve the effect of cultivating the great Tao of patterns. This method was quite mysterious and contained many mysteries. Through this method, the chaotic vital chi could be continuously channeled into Yuan Lei's body. Through a special circulation method, his body would be tempered. Through this kind of tempering, his body would constantly change. It allowed its flexibility, toughness, and essence to continuously increase. From his bones, marrow, meridians, and organs outwards, it would eventually reach his skin and hair. It would transform his life essence as well. Using this method to temper his body, in theory, through the accumulation of hundreds of thousands of Yuan Hui, he would be able to cultivate to the undying realm and gain the ability to be reborn from a single drop of blood. However, this was only in theory. This method consumed a great deal of energy. After hundreds of thousands of Yuan Hui, who knew what the untainted world would look like, by then, the connate vital chi that filled the world would probably have already been transformed into acquired vital chi. The nature of the energy in the world would have changed greatly. If they wanted to obtain a great amount of energy to temper their bodies, it would become extremely difficult. By then, the speed at which they used this method to temper their bodies would become slower and slower. In the end, it was more likely that Yuan Lei would gradually lose his vitality in the energy tempering and eventually turn into a chaotic crystal. It would be almost impossible for him to cultivate the undying body. At this time, Yuan Lei had obtained the pattern retrospective technique and the encouragement of his parents. Without any hesitation, he guided the chaotic pneuma that poured into his spine and poured it into his lower abdomen dantian. After some strange changes, it rushed out of the dantian and poured into the meridians, trying to open up one acupoint after another. Acquired life forms were acquired life forms after all. No matter how talented they could not be born with all their meridians open like connate gods. If they wanted to cultivate, they naturally needed to make some preparations. Luo Fan, Yuan Tong, and Yuan Tong all had great magical powers, so they easily saw Yuan Lei's cultivation process. When they saw Yuan Tong guiding the chaotic vital chi to open up one acupoint after another like a hot knife through butter, they could not help but look satisfied. Yuan Tong, in particular, had an extremely excited look on his face. This was because he could sense that Ape Thunder's aptitude seemed to have improved a little during the process of unblocking his acupoints. This method is really effective. Why didn't I think of opening my meridians to increase my lightning aptitude? Damn it all. Yuan Tong was filled with regret. The great Tao of patterns cultivated the fleshly body. It was a miraculous technique that combined the soul with the fleshly body, finally allowing the fleshly body to undergo a qualitative transformation and achieve an undying body. Both he and Yuan Shi were innate gods, born with all meridians open, their bodies in the most perfect and most suitable state for cultivation. Ever since the two of them had comprehended the great Tao of patterns, it had already established the deepest foundation in his body. It had long surpassed his meridians and was directly used on his body. It constantly refined his body, causing it to constantly transform. Therefore, the husband and wife had never thought that to cultivate this technique, one must first open the meridians. Boom! Pooh! Quang! Gee! It was as loud as thunder, but it was very mysterious. It was like some kind of unimaginable music, but it was also like some kind of great Tao sound was constantly emitted from Ape Thunder's body. Along with these sounds, every part of Ape Thunder's body and acupoints seemed to have been detonated one powerful bomb after another. They constantly bulged and caved in. During this process, wisps of strange black gas were shaken out from these places. They were the impurities in his meridians. These bulges and depressions continued to spread along with Ape Thunder's technique and gradually swam around his entire body. Along with this change, the wisps of power that were constantly emitted from Ape Thunder's body suddenly converged, and in the blink of an eye, they were completely absorbed into his body, no longer leaking out. This was because as the technique circulated, the energy that he had previously been unable to control had been completely absorbed by the technique. Even if it was a little insufficient, how could it still be emitted? At this time, the chaotic vitality source under Ape Thunder's body was still continuously emitting thick chaotic vitality into his body. However, this time it was not injected into his spine, but directly into his dantian. Moreover, under the operation of the technique, it constantly circulated around his body and was constantly purified. In this process, it became more and more condensed, and the amount also increased. Gradually, it carried a strange aura, as if it had been branded by Ape Thunder. After an unknown period of time, the energy flowing in his meridians had reached a limit and could hardly be increased anymore. It directly filled up his meridians. At this time, the pattern ancestral technique suddenly changed on its own. All the energy in the meridians suddenly rolled back, and in the blink of an eye, it was completely injected into his lower abdomen, where his dantian was. In this limited space, it was extremely compressed. In the end, when this compression reached the extreme, there was already a small, basketball-sized yuan dan in his lower abdomen. Compared to his body that was less than 60 meters tall, such a yuan dan could be considered extremely small. There were a total of 1,296 strange patterns engraved on the surface of this origin core. Every single pattern was extremely profound and seemed to contain some kind of unfathomable mystery. They resonated with a certain part of his body and seemed to have some kind of profound and unfathomable connection with his soul. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's only been 9 days and 9 nights, and he has actually reached the state of core formation. It seems that this technique is very compatible with Ape Thunder. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. It had been 9 days and 9 nights since Ape Thunder started to practice the pattern ancestral technique, until now. Of course, this period of time was only a short period of time for everyone present. It was almost equivalent to the blink of an eye, so no one would feel the slightest impatience, so no one left. In just 9 days and 9 nights, Ape Thunder had actually directly crossed the first stage of the technique, the Qi refinement stage, and reached core formation. This kind of speed could be said to be no slower than that of an innate god. How could Luo Fan not be amazed? However, his admiration was not for Ape Thunder, but for Yuan Tong and his wife. The reason why Ape Thunder was able to reach this level was not because of anything else, but because of the hard work of Yuan Tong and his wife over the past tens of thousands of years. It was precisely because Yuan Tong had continuously poured chaotic qi into Ape Thunder's body over the past tens of thousands of years, continuously increasing the strength of Ape Thunder's body. As a result, Ape Thunder's body was able to contain so much energy and support the operation of the pattern ancestral technique. In the end, he was able to break through the Qi refinement stage and reach core formation in just 9 days and 9 nights. After the formation of the core formation, Ape Thunder was still not satisfied. He continued to operate the technique and frantically extracted the chaotic Qi contained in the extremely rich chaotic Qi source below. He continuously transferred it into his dantian and replenished the core formation. As it was replenished, the patterns on the core formation flickered with all sorts of mysterious lights, and the core formation grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, by the time all the chaotic chi source had been poured into it, the core formation had only grown to the size of 2 basketballs. Compared to his body, it was still so small that it was almost undetectable. By the time all the chaotic chi had entered the core formation, another 3 days and 3 nights had passed. When the chaotic chi in the outside world had become so thin that it was almost undetectable, Ape Thunder could not help but open his eyes in annoyance. He looked around and said, "Why is there no more? That comfortable chi." On the other side, Yuan Tong and Yuan Chi's faces were already covered in tears. Their tears were filled with both joy and unimaginable shock. They had spent thousands of years compressing this chaotic energy source, which was nearly 100 miles wide, to an extreme degree to create it. According to their calculations, the chaotic chi source should have been enough for Ape Thunder to absorb and refine for several periods of time. However, they had never thought that it would only take tens of thousands of years for the chaotic chi source to be completely absorbed by Ape Thunder in just 12 days. One could imagine the shock and joy they were feeling. Good boy. The Yuan Chi could not suppress the emotions in his heart. He opened his arms and hugged Ape Thunder. Thunder Ape was shocked to see the giant ape's hands and extremely fast speed. He had no time to react to the fact that it was his mother. His body instinctively dodged before his consciousness could react. He turned in the air at a speed that was almost like teleportation and avoided the ape's embrace. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water. It was extremely natural. The Yuan Chi was overjoyed by this change. It must be said that although Ape Thunder's physique was extremely good, he had only been tempered passively. How could he use any magical powers? Even the innate ability to control water and earth that the husband and wife had brought with them was too weak to be dealt with. If he had not cultivated the pattern precedence reversal technique, he could only move in the air with the help of the chaotic chi source, let alone avoid the Yuan Chi's hug. Now that he was able to avoid the Yuan Chi's hug so easily, it meant that he already had magical powers. Since he had already stepped onto the path of cultivation, how could she not be happy? Luo Fan, who was watching from the side, was affected by their heartfelt joy and couldn't help but show a faint smile on his face. After all, Ape Thunder had only just formed the primal core and had not studied magical powers in detail. How could he avoid the Yuan Chi's hug if he only dodged instinctively? After a short while, he was tightly locked in the Yuan Chi's embrace. After tens of thousands of years of pursuit, there is finally a result. "Thank you, fellow cultivator," Yuan Tong said to Luo Fan with a look of relief. "The success of this technique also means that my guess is correct. There is no need to thank me." Luo Fan shook his head. Chapter 211. The Mysteries of the Earth, a Treasured Land of Cultivation. Why are you in such a hurry? You've been busy for my son over the past few days, and I haven't even thanked you yet. How can you just leave like this? Why don't you stay for a few dozen years? Perhaps we could discuss the Tao, or perhaps we can find some things to thank you, Yuan Tong hurriedly said. You're too kind, fellow. The pattern Tao is more than enough for this cultivation technique. It would be shameless of me to stay any longer. So be it, fellow. We'll meet again in the future if fate allows it. Farewell. Luo Fan waved his hand. As he spoke, he turned into a streak of azure light that shot into the sky at a speed that surpassed Yuan Tong's reaction speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already disappeared from Yuan Tong's sight. Yuan Tong was just about to urge him to stay when he realized that Luo Fan had already disappeared. He anxiously called out a few times, but it was to no avail. He could only sigh helplessly from below. Only then did Yuan Tong recover from his joy. He also noticed that Luo Fan had left, and he was filled with regret. She was even more grateful to Luo Fan than Yuan Tong, and the regret she felt when she saw Luo Fan leave was several times greater than Yuan Tong's. However, now that her son was able to embark on the path of cultivation, she was more satisfied than anything else. This regret did not linger in her heart for too long before it disappeared. As for Yuan Lei, he was already dizzy from being strangled by Yuan Tong. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to struggle out of his mother's embrace. How could he have the time to pay attention to Luo Fan? Luo Fan did not choose any particular direction. He was only following his instincts, and he was currently heading south. The streak of light was extremely fast, and he was already 1,000,000 kilometers away from Yuan Tong's family of 3 in an instant. Luo Fan's expression was calm, and his eyes shone brightly. However, he could not help but curse himself inwardly. Why didn't I think of that? Since blood rebirth can be cultivated in another way, I should be able to search for the vast freedom demon lord in another direction as well. Cursing in his heart, his mind slightly moved, and one end of the dark green rainbow suddenly pressed down, directly colliding with the ground. At the instant it crashed into the ground, there was a flash of light, giving the cyan ray a mysterious and unfathomable aura. This aura was quite mysterious, but it gave the ray the ability to escape through the earth. In an instant, it sank into the solid ground below like a fish diving into the sea. The yellow spring was located 4,900 kilometers below the surface. The yellow springs meandered and had countless tributaries. They circled around like a huge net and almost covered the entire underground of the primordial world. Although the place where Luo Fan landed was only 1,000,000 miles away from the mainstream of the yellow springs, which Luo Fan came out from, there was still a small tributary. The speed of the rainbow was extremely fast. In just a short while, it brought Luo Fan straight into the yellow springs. The tributary was not big, only about 10 kilometers wide. However, the number of invisible talisman ghosts and visible talisman ghosts had already returned to normal. Within the range of Luo Fan's senses, there were countless of them, and they brought rich vitality to the yellow spring water. Luo Fan did not stay here. With a thought, the dark green rainbow continued to descend, flying straight to the bottom of the yellow springs. Along the way, the invisible talisman ghosts could not detect Luo Fan's passing. Even if they passed by the rainbow, they only knew to look around blankly. In a short while, the rainbow arrived at the bottom of the yellow springs and rushed straight to the bottom of the yellow springs. The location of the yellow springs was like a dividing line, dividing the ground into 2 levels. From the top of the yellow springs to the surface, there were many kinds of resentment in the ground, and there were countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures. However, compared to the bottom of the yellow springs, they could be said to be so few that they were negligible. In the 100 kilometers that Luo Fan passed through the yellow springs, he encountered tens of thousands of heavenly materials and earthly treasures that could not be found in the 4,900 kilometers above. The chi of the earth contained in the ground was so rich that it almost condensed into a substance. Strands of earthy yellow chi of the earth directly reflected the ground, making it look like a piece of meat with countless meridians and blood vessels. However, what increased at the same time was the evil earth chi and heavy turbid yin chi contained in the ground. Among them, the evil earth chi was extremely harmful to the soul, and it was extremely chaotic, almost uncontrollable. Although Luo Fan had seen the yellow springs several times, it was the first time that he had passed through it and descended. At this moment, when he saw the surrounding scenery, he could not help but be secretly surprised and felt that he had really missed many things in the past. Even though the baleful earth chi was rather dangerous, it was only for ordinary living beings. To Luo Fan, who'd attained the earthly immortal Tao fruit and had even attained the golden immortal realm, it was simply a treasure trove. The heavenly materials and earthly treasures contained here were tempered by the evil earth chi and heavy turbidine chi, and the same materials were at least a level better than those above. The materials collected here only needed to be slightly refined, and they would become powerful magic tools that could not be underestimated. Master, this is really a good place. If these evil earth chi are collected, it can definitely make my body twice as strong. Quickly collect it for me, please. The Xuanji child began to clamor in Luo Fan's mind again. Luo Fan was the refiner of the Xuanji robe. At this moment, with a slight sense, he knew that the Xuanji child was speaking the truth. If the endless evil earth chi was integrated into the Xuanji robe, the nature of the Xuanji robe would change slightly. Not only would the body become much stronger, it might even have the ability to damage the soul, and its power would be greatly increased. However, why would he specially collect these evil earth chi for the Xuanji child? What did he refine the Xuanji child for? Therefore, he only nodded and said, "You can collect it yourself." The Xuanji child was very content. Although Luo Fan did not collect it for her, with Luo Fan's approval, she still cheered. As she cheered, millions of rays of dark green light rushed out of the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into. In an instant, they weaved and transformed into a large silk net that was tens of thousands of miles in circumference. As if covering the sky and earth, it constantly wrapped around the increasingly dense, evil earth chi in the ground and sucked it into the rainbow that Luo Fan had transformed into like water. An extremely satisfied moan appeared in Luo Fan's mind. It was the Xuanji child who was satisfied with the endless evil earth chi, and there seemed to be an endless sense of pleasure. The Xuanji child had a rather strong spiritual consciousness. Small matters like collecting evil earth chi did not require Luo Fan's attention. He did not care and only controlled the rainbow to descend. Occasionally, he would see some heavenly treasures that were difficult to find above and casually collect them. His speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had traversed tens of thousands of miles and arrived at the ground layer that was 14,900 miles underground. There were tens of thousands of materials collected. However, all these materials only occupied a small amount of space in the sleeve universe. It was less than 1% of the space. The sleeve universe, which had expanded a lot, was already abnormally empty. This depth of 14,900 miles seemed to be a special depth. Here, the evil earth chi and the heavy, turbid extreme yin chi had already intertwined and condensed into a substance. It gathered together with the boundless origin energy of the earth, forming an extremely strange layer that seemed to be incomparably dangerous, yet also incomparably safe. The structure of the untainted land stratum was very strange. As far as Luo Fan knew at this time, the area within 4,900 kilometers of the ground could be called a cultivation treasure land. There were countless treasures of heaven and earth in this area, as well as countless sources of chaotic vitality. Moreover, because these chaotic origin chi had formed at the beginning of the world, not much had dissipated. Therefore, compared to the surface, the chaotic origin chi in the caves leading to the surface, it was much denser. Cultivating there was no need to worry about not having chaotic origin chi to absorb. 4,900 miles down to the depth of 14,000 miles, the evil earth chi grew thicker and thicker, and there was even more heavy yin chi. As a result, even though there were more natural treasures in this area, and the number of chaotic energy sources did not decrease by much, it made a large part of the underground look extremely dangerous and was not suitable for cultivation. In front of Luo Fan, the evil earth chi, the heavy turbid extreme yin chi, and the chaotic origin chi were all connected with the earth chi, forming a very strange substance. This caused the nature of each energy to change slightly. The evil earth chi's ability to harm the spirit was weakened to the minimum, and the heavy turbid extreme yin chi became less extreme. This made this depth of stratum once again a cultivation treasure land. Although the environment below was far from Buzhou Mountain, it was much better than ordinary cultivation treasure lands. However, it was extremely difficult to reach this depth. Those who had not cultivated enough would not be able to pass through the dangerous strata that was tens of thousands of miles thick. However, those who had cultivated enough would not be interested in such a precious cultivation ground 14,000 miles below. This could also be considered a kind of balance between the heavens and the earth. So full, so full. I really can't eat anymore. Although it had only been less than half a day since they arrived here, Xuanji Boy had already absorbed hundreds of millions of tons of baleful earth chi. At this moment, he finally sighed in Luo Fan's mind. "Master, I've absorbed too much evil earth chi. I'm going to sleep now." Xuanji Boy's somewhat lazy voice sounded. Luo Fan said indifferently, "Just go. Don't be noisy. So heartless. I've suffered a blow." Xuanji Boy mumbled, and then fell silent. Luo Fan knew that Xuanji Boy had no sense of self, and this performance was just words without meaning. But he still felt a sense of warmth, and a faint smile appeared on his face. The smile disappeared as soon as it appeared. With a turn of his body, he broke into the stratum formed by the condensation of all kinds of energy. As soon as he entered, a cool and warm feeling emerged in his mind. Taking a deep breath, the rolling energy surged into his body and rushed straight into the earthly immortal's Tao fruit that seemed to be both real and illusory. After being shaken by the earthly immortal's Tao fruit, it turned into extremely pure energy and was completely absorbed by the magical power units within. The structure of the earthly immortal Tao fruit was very mysterious, but it was not formed by the accumulation of magical power units. When the energy surged into it, it instantly circulated 518,400 magical power units, causing the 12,960 strange patterns to flicker and seem to be filled up a little. It's really a blessed place for cultivation. If I have time in the future, I may be able to open another cave abode here. Luo Fan thought in his heart, but his strange habit of opening a cave abode was triggered again. Fortunately, he knew that the current situation was not suitable. The thought flashed across his mind, and his figure continued to rush down. As he went down, the various kinds of energy became more and more intertwined. After another 10,000 miles, the various kinds of energy had become chaotic and could no longer be distinguished from each other. Moreover, other than these kinds of energy, there were very few substances that could resist the erosion of this kind of energy. However, once there was the existence of this kind of plant that was not eroded by the energy, it was an extremely rare treasure. Luo Fan urgently needed materials to replenish the sleeve creator, so he would not let go of such a rare treasure. Chapter 212. Earth Fire Magma. Born in the morning and dead in the evening, this layer of chaotic energy, which was a mixture of all kinds of yuan qi and the essence of all kinds of materials, extended for nearly 20,000 miles before it was replaced by another layer. 50,000 miles underground, all kinds of chaotic energies seem to have gone through a series of fundamental changes after being bred for a few times. Endless explosive changes occurred almost without any warning. The chaotic energy seemed to have been ignited, and the originally extremely condensed energy, which was almost tangible, transformed into a very strange liquid existence, emitting endless heat. This liquid was piled up nearly 50,000 miles above the ground. To be exact, it was 49,000 miles below the ground. A huge layer of magma was formed in that area, constantly roasting the thick ground, allowing the chaotic energy to generate some kind of rare impetus. As a result, the chaotic energy didn't show any signs of death, but flowed continuously underground like a liquid. When Luo Fan came to this junction, he suddenly felt that the cool and warm feeling around him, as if he was in a treasure land for cultivation, had completely disappeared. The dark red lava, which emitted endless heat, was surging down below, like a ferocious monster opening its huge mouth, waiting for him to enter. At this time, Luo Fan's great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes were still working. His eyes turned, and in a flash of golden and silver light, he had already seen through the secrets of the earth fire magma down below. The earth fire magma in front of him was a mixture of the earth's yuan qi, evil qi, heavy yin qi, chaotic yuan qi, connate yuan qi, and various other kinds of yuan qi, all kinds of energy, and the essence of all kinds of natural treasures. Under the incomparably great pressure of the earth, they had reached a critical point of some mysterious reaction and finally produced an explosive change. After such a transformation, the environment above, which was originally like a treasure land for cultivation, instantly changed completely. Not to mention suitable for cultivators. Even if a cultivator had a slightly weaker defensive ability, entering it would be courting death. I didn't expect there to be so many types of earth fire. Luo Fan had already expected this, but he still couldn't help but praise it when he saw it with his own eyes. There were countless types of earthly fire below, and there were billions of them. They intertwined with each other, forming a dark red color that had the ability to corrode the bodies of living beings. Even when the beam of light floated 100 miles away from the lava, Luo Fan could sense wisps of strange heat striking the beam of light and drilling into his body, trying to penetrate through the protection of the beam of light and corrode his body. This heat was so strange, and its corrosive ability was so strong that if not for the extremely strong defense of the Star Pearl robe, Luo Fan would probably have to use his own remarkable ability to completely resist the corrosion of this heat. With a slight thought, the dark green beam of light that Luo Fan had transformed condensed into a dark green robed Luo Fan who stood 100 miles above the lava. After entering this place, the surrounding environment was too complicated. Transforming into a beam of light was no longer of much use to increase his speed, so there was naturally no need for him to maintain this state that was suitable for flight. At this moment, when Luo Fan's figure condensed, countless changes suddenly occurred in the magma 100 miles below him. Seemingly agitated by his aura, countless amounts of lava quickly gathered together, surged, flowed, and gradually produced some kind of profound and unfathomable change. In the end, they turned into various lava creatures of various sizes, gentle and tame, or violent and ferocious. These creatures came in different shapes, but they had one thing in common. That was, their form was quite similar to the astral wind, lightning, and fire life forms in the layer of astral wind, lightning, and fire. Inside them, there were even strange three-dimensional patterns that were still constantly evolving and gradually taking shape. They seemed extremely profound, but they were not complete. After these strange three-dimensional patterns were formed, they seemed to turn into black holes, madly absorbing the mysterious and indescribable aura that Luo Fan emitted. Through the agitation of this aura, some kind of incredible effect was produced. It caused some kind of profound and mysterious change to occur in the lava, causing the strange three-dimensional patterns inside the bodies of the lava creatures to gradually be completed, causing the spiritual sense of these lava creatures to become more and more complete. These creatures that were gradually taking shape constantly roared at Luo Fan and struggled madly, as if they wanted to pounce on Luo Fan, but were powerless to break free from the restriction of the lava layer. The roars and struggles of these creatures seemed to contain endless joy, incomparable anger, extremely docile, and extremely crazy. Luo Fan frowned imperceptibly. Looking around, he found that these creatures only appeared within a radius of 1,000 miles, which happened to be the range of his aura. In the blink of an eye, he knew that these creatures were indeed produced under the influence of his aura. He couldn't help but feel inexplicably surprised. He raised his hand and waved. In a lava layer below, a ball of lava that was thousands of feet in size flew up through the obstruction of countless lava creatures and arrived in front of Luo Fan in the blink of an eye. He raised his hand and rubbed it in the air. As his aura poured into it, the ball of lava began to undergo a profound and inexplicable change. Inside the magma, there were many mysterious and unfathomable patterns forming. Along with the changes of these patterns, this large mass of magma suddenly turned into a flood dragon, then into a tiger, then into an insect, then into a bird, then into a fish. All kinds of creatures that Luo Fan had seen and thought of were being evolved from this little bit of magma. And the transformation of these creatures changed according to the change of his aura. Every time the will contained in his aura changed slightly, the lava would naturally transform into another form. There were thousands of changes, tens of thousands of forms, and there was nothing wrong with it. The spiritual consciousness of these lava creatures was extremely simple and could not be called complete. It seemed to only have an extremely simple instinct. They only knew to swallow the aura to strengthen themselves and knew that getting close to Luo Fan would bring them endless benefits. Other than that, they had no other knowledge. Luo Fan carefully observed the transformation process of these lava creatures, and then combined it with the essence of the lava reflected by his golden eyes of the great sun and silver eyes of the bright moon to make deductions. When the transformation of the lava creatures was exhausted, his understanding of the lava had reached an unimaginable level. This lava was formed by all kinds of yuan qi, evil spirit qi, and the essence of heavenly materials and earthly treasures through a variety of mysterious and indescribable changes. It was not as simple as raising the temperature of the rocks and soil to a higher level. The process of its formation contained infinite vitality and endless life force. It was only because there was no primer, no suitable environment, that these vitality and life force could not produce a qualitative change and could not condense into a real creature. And at this time, Luo Fan's aura was equivalent to this primer. The tenacity of the desire to live was extremely incredible. With this bit of life primer, even though the environment within the lava wasn't very suitable, the boundless life force automatically evolved into countless changes and condensed into countless life forms within the lava. It was just that this environment was, after all, very unsuitable, so this kind of evolution required a huge amount of time. If this evolution process lost Luo Fan's aura as a primer, these lava would turn back into lava and completely lose the possibility of forming. Knowing this, Luo Fan already knew what he had to do. He raised his hand and gently pulling out the aura that was attracted by the hundreds of feet diameter ball of lava in front of him. This lava creature completely collapsed in an instant, turning back into the lava. Then, with a slight thought, there were countless three-dimensional talismans flashing above the lava. Luo Fan took a step forward and stepped onto the red cloud. He felt that his feet were soft and tough, and the feeling was quite wonderful. At the same time, his connection with the outside world was completely isolated by this red cloud, so the heat of the outside world could not corrode him, and his aura did not leak out. Without Luo Fan's aura as a guide, all the lava within a radius of 1,000 miles instantly let out an incomparably shrill and miserable howl. In the blink of an eye, it completely collapsed, turning back into ordinary lava and fusing with the lava layer. With a ripple, it disappeared without a trace, as if nothing had happened. Seeing so many creatures that were born because of him disappear, although Luo Fan knew that these creatures did not have a complete spiritual sense and only had simple instincts, he still felt a little emotional. With a single thought, the crimson cloud he was riding on spun around, covering a distance of over 50 kilometers and diving straight into the lava down below. These dark red, auspicious clouds were originally refined from lava. Naturally, it had a strong restraining effect on the lava. Under its protection, the heat above the lava, which was tens of thousands of times stronger than above, was completely isolated, no longer able to have any corrosive effect on him. Moreover, the aura on his body was completely isolated by the dark red, auspicious clouds, and it was difficult for even a trace of it to be emitted. Even the lava that was dozens of feet away from him couldn't sense a trace of his aura. In such a state, when Luo Fan entered the lava layer, he did not cause the slightest change. Like a drop of water falling into the ocean, not even a ripple could be felt. In the endless lava, in the heat that could burn steel into molten steel and diamonds into nothingness, Luo Fan leisurely drifted on a cloud. Such a contradictory scene would make one involuntarily feel reverence. The nature of the lava was very special, and the various energies within it were extremely corrosive, even to the star pearl robe, let alone the other impurities within it. Compared to the tens of thousands of miles of chaotic layer above, the impurities in the lava layer were much less, and of course, these impurities were even more precious. As Luo Fan casually collected the materials he encountered along the way, he continued to descend. Chapter 2:13. The thickness of the magma layer was 40,000 miles thick. For Luo Fan, who was under the protection of the auspicious cloud, This only meant that the thickness of the layer where he could collect the treasures was only 40,000 miles thick. Riding on the crimson magic cloud, Luo Fan continued to descend. In less than half a day, Luo Fan had already descended 40,000 miles into the magma layer. His universe in his sleeve had been replenished by the heavenly materials and earthly treasures in this 40,000-mile area. More than half of it was filled, but it could no longer be called empty. When he reached a depth of 90,000 kilometers, Luo Fan raised his eyes and looked around. All he could see was darkness. It was a darkness that seemed to devour all light, yet there was not a trace of ferocity. It was extremely peaceful and deep, a darkness that could make anyone completely calm down. As Luo Fan rode the crimson auspicious clouds and stopped at this depth, he sensed an incomparably peaceful and deep presence rolling towards him from the darkness below. With this presence, the heat that was constantly pouring into his body from the auspicious clouds around him was gradually isolated. Sensing the changes in the surrounding aura, Luo Fan instantly understood. He was already at the extreme end of the earth. Although he could still descend, and could even descend for a very long distance, once he stepped into this darkness, he would no longer be in the ground. Instead, he would enter an even more mysterious and unpredictable region. Thinking back to the journey he had gone through after entering the underground, a familiar feeling suddenly entered Luo Fan's heart. Although the heaven and earth were vastly different, in some ways they were similar. The sky was 90,000 kilometers wide. Above the sky was the strong wind, lightning and fire layer, and 10,000 kilometers above the strong wind, lightning and fire layer was the endless starry sky. The ground was 90,000 kilometers wide. Below this 90,000 kilometers was boundless darkness. Luo Fan could even imagine that below this boundless darkness, there should be a place similar to the endless starry sky. Understanding this completely different yet exceptionally similar connection between heaven and earth, an indescribable feeling suddenly surged into his heart. This kind of enlightenment was extremely mysterious. It made him feel as if he had understood something, but at the same time, he didn't seem to understand anything. Although this kind of comprehension was indescribably wonderful and hard to grasp, the effects it produced were indeed real. The world of his sea of consciousness became a little more stable with this kind of enlightenment. With a thought, Luo Fan controlled the crimson cloud and sank into the endless darkness below. Not long after, he rode the cloud into the infinite darkness. As the auspicious cloud disappeared into the darkness, an extremely tranquil and aloof feeling welled up in his heart. It filled his every thought and made him feel incomparably tranquil. Suddenly, he seemed to feel that the endless darkness around him was the beginning and the end of everything. It was as if the entire world and the primal chaos had started from this darkness, and it was also as if the entire world and the primal chaos would eventually return to this darkness. The auspicious cloud of the 12 restrictions couldn't resist the surrounding endless darkness at all. Instead, it was gradually eroded and assimilated in this endless darkness. In the blink of an eye, it had already turned jet black. It looked no different from the surrounding endless darkness, and it was even difficult to see clearly. Luo Fan had the great sun golden eyes and the bright moon silver eyes. Although there wasn't any light in the surroundings, even the crimson lava above him couldn't let any light pass through. This place still belonged to the untainted land after all. Since it belonged to the untainted land, the pair of eyes obtained from the Pengu chaotic heavenly pupils possessed all kinds of special magical powers. It was only a matter of time for him to see the surrounding environment clearly. As his line of sight changed, Luo Fan had already seen the surrounding darkness clearly. The surrounding endless darkness wasn't empty. It could even be said that the substance content of any place he passed by, any terrain or environment, was far less than this place. The boundless darkness was filled with a myriad of strange existences that were extremely tiny like specks of dust, yet were able to absorb all light. They were calm, deathly silent to the extreme, and emanated strands of an aura that calmed one's mind. The number of such tiny existences had reached an unimaginable level. They were even denser than the densest crystals and the densest strata. Moreover, they were distributed very evenly, just like the vitality on the earth, covering everything within his sight. Even at this moment, they were constantly inhaling and exhaling inside and outside of his body along with his breathing. The auspicious cloud that could defend against the temperature of molten steel and stone could do nothing to these tiny existences that were as tiny as specks of dust, but had infinite assimilation power. In the few breaths of time he entered this endless darkness, this auspicious cloud had already lost its effect. After all, this auspicious cloud was casually refined by Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan was surprised that it had lost its effect so quickly, he didn't feel too much heartache. With a thought, he waved his hand, and the 12 restrictions contained within the auspicious cloud instantly collapsed. As the restrictions collapsed, the auspicious cloud instantly expanded under Luo Fan's feet, turning from the original diameter of 30 feet to a sphere that was 300 feet in diameter. There was a strong dark red light that burst out from it, and there was also a tremendous amount of heat that attacked him. However, whether it was the light or the heat, they only appeared for an instant. After an extremely short instant, whether it was the light or the heat, they were completely devoured by the tiny existences that were like specks of dust, and they instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the lava was also assimilated and devoured by the existence that was as tiny as specks of dust, but it contained endless mysteries. All of it was transformed into tiny existences that were as tiny as the dark existences. Its nature also changed from its original violent nature to extremely calm and peaceful, as if it had finally found its home. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his hand and grabbed lightly. The tiny existences within 30 feet in front of him continued to gather, gradually gathering into a fist-sized black ball in front of him. There's actually such a change? I didn't expect it to be so profound. The moment the small ball was formed, Luo Fan was suddenly shocked. His eyes lit up, and his golden and silver pupils instantly enveloped the small ball, illuminating the inside and outside of the small ball. As the density of the tiny existences increased, an extremely strange, obscure, but real-life force suddenly appeared in the center of the small ball. This life force kept evolving, and in the end, it turned into a bat-like creature that was the size of 2 fingers. However, it was completely different from a bat. It seemed more powerful, more agile, and more unbelievable. Swish! A sound wave that far exceeded the range of ordinary people's hearing rang out from the bat's mouth. As the sound came out from the bat's mouth, the countless tiny existences in the surroundings started to tremble weakly but mysteriously. It was as if they were transmitting some kind of mysterious information or exchanging some kind of mysterious information. The frequency of this sound wave far exceeded the range of ordinary people's hearing, but it naturally could not exceed Luo Fan's hearing. After listening carefully, Luo Fan already knew that this sound wave was an existence similar to vision. It was the bat's method of perceiving things, and it was not much different from his own eyes. Just as Luo Fan was very interested and wanted to carefully study the state of this bat, an inexplicable sense of danger suddenly appeared in his mind. As this sense of danger appeared, an extremely terrifying invisible force suddenly appeared in all directions and squeezed toward Luo Fan at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, countless heavenly Sanskrit chants appeared in Luo Fan's ears. He knew that everything was still dark in front of him, and all the light was still completely absorbed by those tiny existences. However, he still felt that there was endless golden light in front of him, as if there were countless heavenly flowers falling and countless golden lotuses gushing out. It was as if in the blink of an eye, the entire world had become the legendary Western paradise. Mahasvara Demon Master. In an instant, such a name appeared in Luo Fan's mind. In this chaotic world, Luo Fan had encountered very few living beings, and there were very few living beings that could shake his tenacious mind and could break through his body's instinctive defenses. The Mahesvara demon master was clearly one of them, and this method was clearly not the method of nurturing living beings in the endless darkness, so it was very likely that it was Luo Fan's target this time. The Mahesvara demon master. Knowing that this was very likely the target's method, Luo Fan's mind moved slightly. The dark green Big Dipper robe flashed, and the terrifying invisible force that attacked from all directions was isolated. At the same time, the earthly immortal's Tao fruit in his body shook violently. His mind and will also produced extremely violent ripples, and the golden and silver light in his eyes flickered rapidly. He had already broken through the endless golden light and countless heavenly Sanskrit chants, and found the source of the attack. It was a middle-aged man wearing a starlight robe and a tall hat. He had a dignified expression, and in the darkness, he seemed to be the center of the entire dark space, suppressing the entire void. "Welcome to the 18 levels of hell," the middle-aged man said as he looked in the direction where Luo Fan was at the moment when he turned his gaze to Luo Fan. As he said this, the entire dark space suddenly underwent an incredible change, as if the entire space was rippling with his words, and some incredible changes were occurring. When Luo Fan saw this dignified middle-aged man, he immediately knew that this person was definitely not the Mahesvara demon master's true form. This was because he was completely formed from the endless tiny existences around him. It was just like the bat inside the fist-sized sphere in front of Luo Fan. The only difference was that this middle-aged man had gathered thousands of times more tiny existences than the bat. Chapter 214. Luo Fan casually grabbed the black ball in front of him and crushed it into powder that scattered in all directions. The bat-like life form in the black ball naturally collapsed and died with this pinch, scattering in all directions along with the powder. The 18 levels of hell are the most beautiful places in the primordial world. The middle-aged man was expressionless, and his tone was flat. However, it had an indescribable charm, as if it contained infinite majesty. As he said that, countless tiny existences around him gathered towards him. They gradually accumulated around him, producing endless strange lights that flickered around him. Gradually, they formed 18 strange worlds. Each of these 18 worlds occupied a square area around his body. They were all different in size, and there was not a single trace of similarity between them. Their structures were extremely profound, reaching an unfathomable level. The 18 worlds were intertwined, constantly circulating, constantly entangling, and constantly influencing each other. Although they seemed to be scattered all over the place, the 18 worlds intertwined. Although they seemed to be distributed everywhere, it felt like they were a complete world. Moreover, they were completely independent, making them seem extremely mysterious. Within these 18 worlds, the light and shadows formed a vicious and ugly punishment, as if there were countless evil spirits and yakshas torturing countless living beings. These 18 worlds were not unchanging. Their positions were not fixed either. Instead, they were constantly circulating, and the world were constantly alternating. Their positions were constantly changing, and the laws of their changes were complicated and mysterious. It seemed to contain some mysterious and indescribable secret. Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. As golden and silver light flashed in his eyes, he carefully examined the laws of the 18 worlds' changes. In the blink of an eye, he obtained a very obscure sequence of the 18 worlds. He was filled with admiration, and at the same time, he had an inexplicable understanding. The various scenes within the 18 kilograms world began to change extremely rapidly as the worlds changed. At the same time, the area of the 18 worlds began to increase. In the blink of an eye, the 18 worlds had increased to a radius of 100,000 kilometers, and they directly arrived in front of Luo Fan. It looked like it was about to swallow Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan had already seen a trace of the veins of this world, and understood a trace of the mysteries of these 18 worlds. With a thought, golden and silver light flickered in his eyes, and the space-time in front of him was violently distorted. After the distortion, a passageway appeared in front of him, leading to the dark incarnation that was 100,000 miles away. The Pangu heavenly pupil is indeed very mysterious. However, how much power can you unleash? This divine ability of mine is an inherent divine ability of my dark incarnation. It has the ability to open up space-time and devour all living beings. You're still lacking if you want to dodge it. The dark incarnation of the great freedom heavenly demon Lord spat out emotionlessly. His words were as majestic as the voice of the great Tao. This sentence shook the entire dark space, as if the entire space was responding to his words. As he spoke, the 18 worlds, like 18 palms, squeezed towards the distorted passageway that Luo Fan was in. In the blink of an eye, the passageway that Luo Fan had created with the help of the golden eyes of the great sun and the silver eyes of the bright moon completely collapsed, and the passageway was once again filled up by the 18 worlds. The moment the passageway was crushed, Luo Fan only felt his eyes tremble slightly, as if he had been heavily punched. However, he did not feel the slightest bit unhappy because of this. Instead, an indifferent smile appeared on his face, as if everything was under control. Through the compression of these 18 worlds, he had a deeper understanding of the mysteries of these 18 worlds. Although he still could not see through the origins of these 18 worlds, he already knew that the countless punishments in these 18 worlds and the constantly changing worlds were all just illusions. Among these 18 worlds, the deepest secret and the most powerful power was the change of space-time. Knowing this, he already had a rough idea of how to break through these 18 worlds. Without stopping, he lifted his foot and stepped lightly into the world in front of him. In an instant, he felt that he had already disappeared from the primitive world and arrived in a desolate world filled with countless raging bulls the size of a mountain. The ground of this world was completely filled with raging bulls, so densely packed that there was almost no space left. These raging bulls ran over from infinitely far away and ran to infinitely far away places. Looking at the size of these raging bulls and looking at the space that they filled, this entire world seemed to have no space for the raging bulls to run in circles. However, they were running at an incomparably fast speed. The mystery behind this is quite mysterious. And below these raging bulls, there were countless lives being trampled by these raging bulls in a frenzy. They continuously howled miserably. When the raging bulls stepped on them, they turned into minced meat. When the raging bulls left, they came back to life. This cycle repeated endlessly, and the cruelty had reached an unbearable level. When Luo Fan stepped into this world, he knew that this world was the bull pit hell of the 18 layers of hell. Legend had it that in the mortal world, anyone who killed animals at will would be thrown into this hell and suffer countless years of trampling. In this bull pit hell, there seemed to be no vitality, no energy, and even the laws of space were completely different from the primitive world. Stepping into it, Luo Fan felt that all his magical powers were far away from him. His figure landed, and in the blink of an eye, he was already in the midst of the raging bulls. The raging bulls the size of a mountain lifted their huge hooves and trampled towards him. Such an illusion was already useless when I was going through the heavenly tribulation, let alone now. Luo Fan smiled and sighed. He looked up at the raging bulls' hooves that were trampling towards him, and with a light step, he directly passed through the hooves and stepped 100 miles above the raging bulls. He looked down at the endless raging bulls below. Then his eyes flashed. The whole world changed in an instant. It was no longer boundless. Instead, it only had a radius of 100,000 kilometers. Moreover, it was no longer an independent world. Instead, it was 18 worlds stacked on top of each other. The scenery constantly changed, but the essence of it remained the same. The 18 worlds fused together. It was like a complete world. These 18 worlds were like 18 parts of his complete world, and the various punishments, All kinds of indescribably ferocious and cruel punishments were just illusions created by the flow of energy in the 18 parts of this world, even though these illusions created by the vast Freedom Devil Lord had incredible power. The vast Freedom Devil Lord's dark incarnation was in the center of this world, the core. At this moment, he stood in the darkness with a calm expression. His starry robe fluttered without wind, and there seemed to be a huge force in the void combining with him, forming an indescribably mysterious whole. The flow of energy in the 18 parts of this world, seemed to be evolving some kind of mystery of space-time. After Luo Fan said that, the vast Freedom Devil Lord looked up and saw Luo Fan's figure as if he could see through the infinite space-time. Luo Fan was currently floating casually in the void. The rules of this world were very strange, and it seemed to be able to suppress the flow of magic power, making him feel like he had become an ordinary person, without a trace of extraordinary power. But that was all. His mana naturally could not be suppressed because of this. His extremely high cultivation level could not be blinded because of this. As long as he could see through the reality of this world, it was as if he had broken through the barrier that blinded his senses. He could use his own power at will. Although the 18 layers of hell were divided into the hell of tongue pulling, the hell of scissors, the hell of iron tree, the hell of mirror of sin, and so on, in reality, the 18 layers of hell did not refer to the 18 spaces, but to the 18 divisions of time. The first layer of hell referred to the punishment of 5 billion years, and this punishment could be any of the 18 minor hells. The second layer of hell was the punishment of the first layer of hell, which was 20 times more than the punishment of the first layer of hell. It could also be any one of them. Hence, the punishment of every layer of hell was 20 times more than the previous layer of hell. This continued until the 18th layer of hell reached an indescribable amount of time. If this happened in the primordial world, the entire primordial world would probably decline and be destroyed, and it would not reach the end of this layer of hell. It's a pity that although you have comprehended the true meaning of the 18 layers of hell, your cultivation realm is not enough to fully develop it. Otherwise, the power of this hell would not be limited to this. Gold and silver light flickered in Luo Fan's eyes as he sighed softly. The area below, 90,000 miles underground, was the 18 layers of hell. This does not mean that there are such various punishments underground, but the speed of time passing here. The slowest first layer of hell is 3,750 years, which is equivalent to a day in the primordial world. At the bottom, the 18th layer of hell reached an indescribable amount of time. Compared to it, the entire primordial world seemed to be eternal and unchanging. It exists forever. Although the great Freedom Heavenly Demon Master had entered the 18 layers of hell a few days earlier than Luo Qi, he had only been in the 18 layers of hell for a short period of time. It was already very rare for him to be able to form the Darkness Incarnation and use the Darkness Incarnation's innate magical power, the 18 layers of hell. How could he have comprehended it so much? To be able to change the flow of time hundreds to tens of thousands of times faster was already extremely difficult. Hence, he needed to use the illusion of punishment to make Luo Fan addicted, and he could not use the true punishment time of the 18 layers of hell to fight the enemy. Chapter 215. Chapter 215 of the Diada 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. Only time was the cruelest punishment in the 18 hells of hell. There were all sorts of obscure energies supporting the operation of the 18 levels of hell, and there were also tiny specks of light, heat, and energy that could absorb all light, all heat, and all energy. However, there were no conditions suitable for cultivators to cultivate here. Therefore, when a cultivator entered the 18 hells of hell, his power could only leak out continuously and be absorbed by the tiny specks that could absorb everything. It was impossible for him to cultivate, and it was impossible for his power to grow. Therefore, although the first hells of hell lasted 3,750 years, which was equivalent to a day in the primordial world, it was not suitable for cultivators to cultivate here. The longer a cultivator was placed in the 18 hells of hell, the more power would leak out, and the crueler the punishment would be. The 18 Hells of Hell set up by the great freedom demon Lord's dark incarnation was not perfect. The changes in time were not as natural and obscure as the real 18 Hells of Hell, and there were also many chisel marks. However, Luo Fan's eyes had the ability to change time and space in the primordial world. Through these chisel marks, he easily discovered the true mystery of the 18 Hells of Hell. The great freedom demon Lord did not respond to Luo Fan's words. He just raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The 18 Hells of Hell around him instantly began to rotate rapidly. As the rotation continued, Luo Fan felt the flow of time around him change rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had reached 12,000 times the speed of the primordial world. He had arrived at the world that represented the 18 Hells of Hell, or rather, the part of the world. As he arrived, an indescribable suction force was generated from everywhere in the world, acting on all the power in Luo Fan's body. Be it his magic power, his physical strength, or even the power of his spirit, they were all being sucked away by this suction force. Luo Fan had long seen through the secret of the 18 Hells of Hell created by the Dark Incarnation, so the change in this level was still within his expectations. Therefore, he was not surprised, nor did he panic at all. With just a thought, the magic power in his body suddenly contracted and condensed. The ethereal fruit of the earthly immortal way that condensed in his lower abdomen became even more condensed and harder to move. As the earthly immortal Tao fruit condensed, his dermic powers, his soul, and his physical strength seemed to be attached to some sort of unshakable existence, becoming incomparably stable. No matter how strong the mysterious suction force was, it couldn't affect his power at all. It couldn't extract any of his power at all. With a wave of his hand, Luo Fan's earthly immortal Tao fruit vibrated slightly, and the gold and silver light in his eyes flashed even faster. In the blink of an eye, an incomparably stable path formed in front of him. This path twisted and turned, forming an incomparably profound path in the void that seemed to contain infinite mysteries and mysteries, connecting to the incarnation of darkness in the center of this world. Although there were countless twists and turns on this path, it seemed to be closer to the great freedom, heavenly demon Lord's darkness incarnation. The great freedom, heavenly demon Lord finally showed a look of surprise. It's only been a short period of time in the untainted land, but your cultivation realm has already improved so much. It seems that it is indeed not the right time to occupy the untainted land. My choice to retreat is the right one. He uttered these majestic words. At this moment, Luo Fan had already stepped onto the path, walking several kilometers with each step towards the incarnation of darkness. The 18 levels of hell that surrounded Luo Fan was, after all, the Dark Demon Lord's innate magic. With Luo Fan's ability, if he were in other spaces, or even the real 18 levels of hell, he would be able to cross tens of thousands of kilometers with a single step. After all, he was affected here and could only walk a few kilometers with each step with the help of his own feet. Hearing the incarnation of darkness's words, he smiled faintly and said, "The untainted land contains endless mysteries, and there are countless people whose cultivation realm is no lower than mine. You want to occupy the untainted land? Demon Lord, you really overestimate yourself." As he spoke, Luo Fan had already walked tens of thousands of kilometers and arrived in front of the great freedom, heavenly demon Lord's incarnation of darkness. He raised his right hand and pressed it down on the incarnation of darkness. A faint smile appeared on the incarnation's face as he said, "Overestimate yourself. Let's not talk about how many living beings at your cultivation realm are in the untainted land. The flow of time in the great freedom, heavenly demon Lord is millions of times faster than that in the untainted land. With such a huge amount of time, there are millions of experts in the great freedom, heavenly demon Lord who are slightly weaker than me. How can the untainted land, which has only been established for less than 3 periods, withstand the invasion of such a force? The untainted land is gone. In less than 40,000 years, I will be able to build a stable path and transfer the countless living beings in the great freedom heavenly demon lord into the untainted land. By then, the entire untainted land will be mine. Let's meet again in 40,000 years. Although he spoke very slowly and every word was extremely clear, they were all transmitted into Luo Fan's ears in the short moment that Luo Fan's hand came down. Even the disdainful tone was clearly heard by Luo Fan. The changes were extremely mysterious and unpredictable. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. From the great, boundless heavenly demon master's mouth, he finally learned a bit of the secrets of his boundless transformation heaven. The flow of time in the great freedom heavenly demon lord was faster than that in the untainted land, and Luo Fan already knew this. However, the speed of the flow was actually this fast, which was beyond his expectations. If the flow of time in the great freedom heavenly demon lord was really thousands of times faster than that of the untainted land, then the history of the great freedom heavenly demon lord would be billions of years long, even though the great freedom heavenly demon lord had only been created 2 yuan wei. Under such circumstances, even if the great freedom heavenly demon lord was a few levels lower than the untainted land, and even if the highest level of cultivators it could produce was only at the level of the great freedom heavenly demon lord, the number of high-level cultivators would reach an unimaginable level under the accumulation of time. If it was really as he said, that there were hundreds of millions of experts, then no matter how big the untainted land was, no matter how many innate gods it contained, it would not be able to withstand the invasion of such a huge number of experts. As countless thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan's right hand had already covered the head of the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation. The movement of this barrier was smooth like flowing water, and it drew out a profound and unfathomable trajectory. Moreover, it even contained the deepest profundities of the martial scripture of the Tao Fruit's Grand Tao Scripture, so it was utterly impossible to dodge or resist. After being covered by this hand, the dark incarnation's body collapsed without any delay. At the same time, countless huge cracks appeared in the world that was a simulation of the untainted land's 18 levels of hell. The cracks rapidly expanded, and the whole world almost collapsed in an instant. The whole process was unimaginably fast. From the moment Luo Fan's right hand covered the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation to the moment the whole world collapsed and the surroundings returned to darkness, returning to the 18 levels of hell. Only a split second had passed. During this process, even when the body was crushed and the 18 levels of hell completely collapsed, the dark incarnation still looked at Luo Fan with a faint smile, as if he was looking at a dead man. Luo Fan raised his hand and pressed down lightly. The shock wave caused by the collapse of the world and the collapse of the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation, as well as the countless tiny existences, disappeared into thin air. I didn't expect to fall for it. It's in 100 years. Luo Fan let out a long sigh. It had been 100 years since he entered the 18 levels of hell of the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation. Most of the 100 years had been spent in the process of entering the 18 levels of hell. Although the process seemed to only take an instant, it had in fact taken nearly 100 years. During the 100 years, the great freedom heavenly demon lord's true body had already escaped to God knows where. In a situation where the enemy was in the light and he was in the dark, it was almost impossible to find the great freedom heavenly demon lord's true body. Sighing inwardly, Luo Fan did not intend to give up and continue the process. Although he knew that the great freedom heavenly demon lord had left through various means, and it would be difficult for him to find him again. Since he was already here, Luo Fan could not help but feel unwilling to not see what was beneath the 18 levels of hell. After fighting with the great freedom heavenly demon lord's dark incarnation for 100 years, although Luo Fan had been tricked, he had also gained a general understanding of the 18 levels of hell through this battle. He lifted his foot and took 17 steps forward, and then he came to another space that was completely different from the previous one. In this place, Apart from a faint blood-red light that was infinitely far below, there was only boundless darkness. Even the small dots that filled the darkness and could absorb all light, all heat, and all energy were unprecedentedly calm, and their activity had become unprecedentedly weak. The feeling of calmness, as if one had returned to the beginning of the world, as if one had arrived at the end of the world, was so strong that it was almost tangible. Even Luo Fan himself was affected, and felt that his thinking was not working well. Luo Fan was not surprised by this change. This was because this was the deepest level of the 18 levels of hell. In other words, this was the 18 levels of hell of the untainted world. Here, the speed of the flow of time had reached a state that could not be described with numbers. At this moment, even the spirit space inside the Wuji Palace seemed to have completely stopped time. Regardless of any living creatures, the movement of the grass and the wind, or the flight of the orioles, everything seemed to have stopped in all kinds of strange states. The speed of the flow of time in the spirit space was 730 times than the untainted world.